The first half of this video will be linked in the description, first line. Also probably a card too, though YouTube changed how those work so they no longer pop up in the video player, so I might not do that simply because they made it more boring. Anyway, I promised at the end of the last video that I would start this one with a battle mode ranking, and that's what I'm gonna do now. Yeah, remember this half of the series? I admit, I don't play battle mode as often as the main racing mode, mostly because I feel like I have more control over the match in the latter, but I can still have fun here. It certainly helps that this game's battle mode isn't complete dogshit like Wii and base 8s. Sure, the fact you can't have true elimination battles like in DS or 64 is a bit lame, and also 12 players on the field at once can make matches way more harder and luck-based than they should be. But the variety in modes is commendable, and the battle maps are pretty good as well. Speaking of which, how about I do a ranking of each map right now? With the quality spread across all modes, of course. Oh, and if you want a mode ranking, I'll put it in text. I can't be bothered to script it and talk it right now. Number 8, Lunar Colony. The only battle map in the game that straight up stank. Low gravity makes for fun racing, but it really doesn't lend itself well to battling, especially when it comes to the craters. Also, it's way too big and is too focused on either driving into the middle, the least fun part, or driving around the metallic areas, which are too boring. The aesthetic and set parts are at least cool, and the music is honestly incredible, but this is my absolute last choice in terms of battling locations. Number 7, Battle Stadium. The most uninteresting one, but it's not bad. The anti-gravity section lets you drop down onto the main track, which is neat, and dueling off at the sides can be sometimes fun. The rest is incredibly average. Number 6, Sweet Sweet Kingdom. Already we're in the really good ones. This one's an open field, which means it's not too annoying or restricted to get to where you want to go. And the 2 kingdoms you can use to jump out from is a nice touch. Simple but effective. Also, the aesthetic is just as good as Sweet Sweet Canyon, maybe even better since it's not as easy to see the piss lake. Number 5, Dragon Palace. Surprised that this eventually ended up so low, as this used to be one of my favorites. I guess I just realized I prefer other maps more. This one's still pretty cool though, containing 2 different areas you can be, a smaller but more secretive front yard, and a more open area indoors. And I do love the borrowing of Dragon Driftway's aesthetic, especially with the dragon statues. Helps that now the aesthetic is on a map where I actually remember the design. Number 4, Urchin Underpass. Objectively, Dragon Palace is probably a better map, but shut up, I'm a superficial bastard. I love Splatoon's aesthetic, so having it pretty much ported over to here is sick as hell. The layout is admittedly a bit of a labyrinth, and it's actually surprisingly easy to run into walls, but I'd say it's still fun to traverse and try and avoid people or get an advantage. And having Splatoon music as well is great, on top of the Final Minute song being the Splatoon Final Minute song, yet another win to add to the crossover pile. Though I will say, this being the best new battle course, yet being underneath all the retro ones, probably indicates something. I'm not sure what. Number 3, GCN Luigi's Mansion. Big, Bostonian building. Having so many floors creates so much strategy and places to go. You can either duke it out on the main floor, or travel down the hallways to find someone who's lurking about on lower areas. The part that's truly great though is the roof section, which is aesthetically the coolest part was the rainfall, and so whenever I need to go up there to chase someone down or be chased, it's always a treat. Or I could just go up there myself and drop down and surprise people below. Number 2, SNES Battle Course 1. I have no clue what I was thinking when I once called this the worst map out of the lot. I guess I must have been too superficial. It's extremely basic and flat design wise, but that actually lends itself very well in terms of battle, since it means it's easy to get around and find your target. But what really boosted for me are the jump ramps at the edges, especially the glider one. Going to these and launching myself across the stage, aiming at someone or throwing whatever I have, is a super fun way to get around and was the best boost this stage could have gotten. The only way it could have been even better is if the glider ramp changed positions between the 4 ramps to make things even more interesting. Aside from that, my only complaint is as a tour player, if I were to hear this track song one more time, I will physically break something. And number 1, 3DS Woohoo Town. Did somebody say they wanted to see Woohoo Island in HD? In 8's graphical detail? Holy shit, yes. As someone who loves the world, or I guess island building that Wii Sports Resort has, it's amazing seeing Woohoo Island at this level of polish. And also the map itself is great, with plenty of corridors to go down, a nice open area in the middle, a portion where you can go uphill and then go back down, and they even opened the basketball court for us. It's a blast no matter what mode it's in, and it's by far the best battle map in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Even if I do wish we got to see the rest of the island while still in such a high definition state. If only Nintendo ever made a track where we actually drive across the entire island. Heck, there's enough potential with this setting to make a second track based on it. I guess we'll never know, instead we'll just have Who Gives a Fuck place from Nintendo Switch Sports as a racetrack in the next game instead. So yeah, only 2 maps are not the hugest on and a lot of bangers. I'd say that's a pretty good selection they have here, and nice to see that everything still looks amazing. For a bunch of maps made around 1 to 2 years after the initial 32 to 48 racetracks, they still fit in really well with the graphical style of 8, and you can tell they were really putting all their effort into the presentation of the new proper battle tracks after the disaster of the first attempt. Can you tell what I'm trying to segue into here? So I didn't bother talking about the quality of the base game tracks at large since I pretty much had nothing new to contribute or say. The same thing can't be said for the Booster Course Pass, which if you aren't aware, was DLC containing 48 new courses released 5 years after the initial port. Most of them are in a completely different art style, and all of them are also in Tour, including all of the original tracks. One theory I saw about this DLC was that its purpose was to shove Tour's content into the eyesight of the large part of the Mario Kart audience that dropped Tour instantly and never got to see the majority of the content the game got. Considering the amount of Tour content that isn't in the past though, probably for the best. If a slot was taken up by Remix Choco Island 2, I would probably have a meltdown. A much better theory that I have for the pass's creation was that it was just done as a tax write-off. Like, that's it. And it clearly must have been a large one, because Nintendo wanted this out so quickly that it didn't even put in the level of detail that I've been praising so much throughout the base game. I'm fine with Nintendo deciding to change the art style and not go with the 8-1 even if I do really love it, but I don't think changing it mid-game is the smartest thing to do. I don't even care if it's worse or not, it's just completely different. So, with the entire DLC dripping in capitalism and laziness, it divided the community into two different camps. Either you were disappointed in the lack of effort put into the new tracks, or you were disappointed in the lack of effort put into the new tracks, and you got over it. I'm in the second camp, which isn't the most fun place to be considering I'm an insecure bastard who feels guilty whenever people lash out at him for paying for a scam where they charge you 50 cents each for only 2 to 3 minutes of enjoyment. And then there's discussion on whether or not DLC for this game as a whole was a shit idea, whether or not they should have just made a new game, and I don't wanna go to school today, mommy, they make fun of me. Look, a store-bought gift can be as useful as one that's homemade. So while I'm not gonna act like Nintendo actually cared about these courses, I won't act like this pass didn't give us a lot of fun as hell tracks. Some are even on the same level as some of the best in the base game. Though that is very nice, you'll notice as I start from the bottom and work my way up that there's a lot more D tiers and C tiers than in the previous ranking. Just because even if the good stuff is as plentiful as the base game, there's a lot more lows, especially when it comes to some of their decisions of tracks to bring back. I mean, wow, some of these tracks really dropped the ball. But hey, at least only 2 of them are worse than Dry Desert, and only 1 of them is worse than Exciteback Arena. Speaking of that one, let's talk about that one now, and then afterwards talk about some other tracks that also suck ass. But before we do that, I have a big sudden change I'm making to this part. I've already recorded footage of all the BCP tracks, but literally right before I started editing, the GOAT himself, Chuggaacrayz, sent me, unprompted, capture card footage of all the BCP courses instead. Complete with Toadette on the Master Cycle Zero and everything. Considering this will make the tracks way easier to look at, I'm gonna switch to using this instead. I will note, it will be funny to think about the fact that stages like Wild Woods and TikTok Clock are only going to be scenes where poor TV recording, while Toad Circuit is getting the full HD treatment. Anyway.
I am extremely lactose intolerant. Yeah, I definitely know what that means.
As you've noticed with the tracks I put low in my base game ranking, the usual culprit for a not good track in 8 Deluxe tends to be stuff like boring, or dull, or uncreative, or disappointing. One negative term that didn't ever get brought up is feeling incorrect. And that's because, as I stated in the first part, 8 Deluxe controls so well that it means that worrying about whether or not the track will be impossible to get around is a non-issue. And we've also just evolved past the days of Vanilla Lake 1, Banshee Boardwalk, all that shit. Most of the bad tracks in this game are still tracks, they just happen to be bad. Even the worst of them still have ideas of track design, where I can actually tell what they were going for was putting them together, and most of all, I can drive on them and probably be bored, but at least feel secure and not like I'm driving in no man's land where nothing looks right and nothing makes sense. But that security went out the window entirely, once this thing entered the arena. The worst track in the game by far, Sky High Sunday, is basically a custom track that somehow got into a AAA game. And the most upsetting part is that I could have actually really liked this one if it wasn't so fundamentally flawed. To start with the positives, I think the music's pretty cool. Far from the best, but at least it's upbeat and it has a cool slap bass. And the aesthetic is okay. I used to think it looked garish, but while there's absolutely no texturing anywhere and it's way too bright, it does have a good color scheme and a good theme. I mean, I'm not big on the sky high part, I feel like that was just an excuse not to put this track in the proper setting, but the Sunday part I do like. I stated that I really love Sweet Sea Canyon's theme, and an expansion of that idea with ice cream sounds like it'd be really cool. No pun intended. And they do have the theming down with the finish line being in the freezer that acts as a bar, a helicopter pad made out of chocolate where you land after doing a glide, and the platforms leading to the finish line are ice trays. They don't look the best, but the ideas are there. Honestly, this sounds like it could be even better than Sweet Sea Canyon by being an expansion of that track with a more intricate layout. Except it's not. No, not only is it not, it turns out that the gameplay and layout of this track pretty much invalidate everything I just talked about. First off, it's an oval track. Not only that, but it's a long oval track, aka the non-chaotic type. Hell, most sections don't even have walls for any items to ricochet off of. They at least try to mix it up with glider sections and split paths, but it still just feels so boring to race on. Or at least, it would be boring if it wasn't for the fact that this is the jankiest stage in the entire game. A couple of the other tracks in the BCP are also pretty jank, even including some of my favorites. But there, the jank just showed up in perfectly fine stages due to the fact they were just ported from Tour. If they spent a little more time on making sure they work properly, the jank would be gone. That's not the case with Sky High Sunday, because the jank of this stage is just completely integrated within the layout itself. And then on top of that, they decided to add even more jank that could have been completely avoided. I mean, there's stuff like you can clip through the railings and they give you an anti-gravity boost. If you guys want to remove the railings, remove the goddamn railings. Don't break the fundamental rules of Mario Kart and look professional, damn it. Also, being constantly boosted while trying to drift and also having to deal with stairs as well is not fun. It makes the section feel more difficult than it actually is. But hey, I'll take that over the blind jumps they put in after the ice cream box. The first one is pretty shitty at how it doesn't inform you where to land until you've already landed, but there's also this even worse one on this specific waffle where you're sent literally off the track if you don't know to turn right instantly. The only reason this is an instant death is because of the low gravity making it easier to save yourself. Oh yeah, as well as the entire track being in anti-gravity, it's all entirely low gravity as well, like the F-Zero tracks. It worked in those two, but in this track it just makes me feel even less like I have control and more I'm just floating around trying not to fall off the track. I legitimately think you spend more time in the air than on the ground in this course, which is terrifying. I don't even think I've ever taken the scoop section properly without constantly holding back because I don't trust the track enough to put me on the pass correctly, which wouldn't be an issue if the track at least had a proper road to stay on, but it doesn't. This stage does not contain track design, it's just floating platforms everywhere and just given the task of following the pass to the end. But how can I follow the pass when the pass is cut into pieces and I just have to fall on it with low gravity, blind jumps, and then straight up broken physics on the pieces themselves? And don't say that I'm having a skill issue, because honestly I'm not even that bad at this track. As long as I don't get bullshitted by the track or other racers, I can usually get a high ranking. But it doesn't feel like I am. Usually my playthroughs end with, I spent half the match freaking out over not making a jump and yet I still got in the top 4? Gee, I'm better at this game than I thought, maybe I should go pro. The problem isn't that I suck at the track, the problem is that the track is so shoddily put together, it makes me feel like I suck at the track. I can understand why the track was initially designed like this, despite what Nintendo wants you to think. This started life as a tour track. In that game, you can't drive into walls or drive off stage, so having an unorthodox layout is fine in that game since the game will automatically move you along and keep you safe while you get sent from platform to platform. But now it's being ported to a game with actual driving controls. You'd think Nintendo would actually change the track to work with 8 Deluxe's physics, or just function, resemble, or act like a real racetrack. I genuinely wonder if Nintendo even played this track once before sending it out. This track may not be entirely airballs in all categories, and there's tracks in this game which are, but the fact that the layout and design is some of the most boring, unfunctional, and straight up worst I've ever seen in a Mario Kart game is enough for me to place it at the bottom of this entire catalog, even with the redeeming elements in it. Those would-be redeeming elements are enough to not put it in an F tier, but that does not make up for how this is the one track in the game that I actively want to avoid playing on. Oh, and reminder that this was the second release follow-up to Ninja Hideaway. Yeah, I think that spells out the problem. I don't want this track to be killed entirely and never brought back, but I want it removed from my personal copy until it either gets an actual road to stay on, or just have the entire concept be reworked. Man, if only I wasn't lactose intolerant so I could just eat the track entirely and remove it myself.
They'd probably be confused until someone noticed that the sun had stopped moving across the sky.
As I just said 20 seconds ago, I'm recalling this again for reasons other than assuming everyone watching has goldfish memory. Despite Sky High Sunday being my least favorite track in the game, I don't think it's beyond saving. If they just changed the fundamental design of it to something that can actually be properly driven on, then we might have a good track on our hands, since I did compliment the theming of it. Yet despite me thinking that it's still a slightly better stage than the one I just listed, I'm sorry, but nothing could justify Sunset Wilds being in this game. I mean, I could bring up the most severe issue right off the bat, but instead I'm gonna start with the more unique and interesting stance I have. The original Sunset Wilds was also ass. I mean, I played Super Circuit for the first time after Wave 5 released, but even if it was an improvement over what we have now, it was still one of my least favorites in the whole game, even after I realized that my lack of skill was influencing my tier list too much. I don't know, the aesthetic was pretty mediocre, the ground texture looked ungodly ugly, the mud was pissing me off, and honestly reminded me a lot of the Choco Island tracks from Super Mario Kart. which was one of my least favorite themes from that game. The only things I liked about it were the Shy Guy hazards, the idea not that they were racist, and of course, the sunset. I mean, it's a novel concept to begin with, but it also meant that the kinda ugly orange sky at the start gets replaced with a pink sky and then a nice soothing shade of purple. It's pretty much the only reason why I didn't think the original track was completely worthless. And then it got ported to 8 Deluxe and the sun is completely static on all 3 laps. Oh, and just like the original, the sunset does not look good. I said in the last video that I like sunsets if the sunset in particular looks good, but the one that they picked for this track is pretty ugly. It's entirely mustard yellow and it does not clash well with the rocks at all. If they knew the sun wasn't going to set, why not go for a more twilight approach and have a more pink sky? You know, the best types of sunsets? I mean, I would have gone one step further and have it actually be sundown with a lovely purple night sky, but then the title would really not make sense. As it is right now, the track has no changing skybox, and it's a skybox that could do with some changing. Also, alongside the skybox, the track just looks way too brown and dark. The rocks in the background that are just in the shadows just look awful. I know apparently the 8 Deluxe system can't handle dynamic lighting changes, which I guess explains why the sunset isn't here, even if the fact they didn't want to adjust the source code for the lighting system is pretty lazy. If that's the case though, why did you even bring back this track? What does Sunset Wilds offer that justifies losing its key feature? Nothing. Because fun fact, the sunset wasn't the only redeeming quality this remake took out. You know how I said I thought the Shy Guy tents were an interesting hazard? Now they're outside of their tents and dancing. I'm happy for them, but these are way less interesting than the possibility of driving into their tents and ruining their day. And now directly driving into them just feels a lot more inhumane. They simplified the layout to hell and back as well, which I didn't even like to begin with. They straight up removed the last section of turns and replaced them with a bunch of hills. It only barely resembles the track it used to be. And yet despite this, the track is still pretty much entirely flat. I thought the GBA retros were meant to be outdoing the SNES retros, but I guess this one didn't get the memo. Heck, it even kept the multicolored SNES-esque blocks because it really wanted to be a part of that crowd. And thank God they still kept the large sections of mud that look ugly and feel terrible to manage driving around, because that was clearly such a great part of the OG track. Oh, and one final nail in the coffin, I don't care for the music, which is also the only part of the track that everyone else considered to be not ruined, so that should really tell you how I feel about this one. Yeah, this is worthless. I still would have ranked this pretty low even if it did have the sunset and most of its original elements back, but at least if it had those elements, I would at least be happy for those who love the original track getting what they want. I know there's steep competition for this title, but this legitimately might be the most wasted slot in the entire DLC, because in this state, it's disappointing everyone who liked the original by removing everything that people liked about it, and it's annoying everyone who doesn't like the original by taking up a slot that could have gone to much better tracks. Whatever angle you look at it, this remake is a complete failure. But that being said, it's not an oval or a severely jank oval, so it only gets to be the third worst in the game. How are these C tracks in my favorite Mario Kart?
Graphic design is my passion.
You know how I said before that the first few waves looked rough? Logically, that would mean that the first wave would have looked the roughest, and boy howdy does it. The entire pass doesn't look as detailed as the base game, but Wave 1 100% had the least detail in it. Pretty much all of the 8 tracks didn't even have proper textures, which even applies to the tracks that made up for it, but is a good color scheme or just a good idea. Considering that this was the first impression we got for the DLC, and we didn't know what would be coming later, can you understand why this pass started so controversially? Of course, a common argument back then, and one that I mostly hold myself to now, is that you won't notice the lack of graphics while driving. It's kinda disappointing that so many great tracks added to this pack didn't get the original 8's touch, which means they might not be able to get a similar touch in a future game. But if the track itself is still fun, I don't care about what could have been, and will still enjoy myself just fine. I mean, I'm never going to notice the lack of detail and lazy texturing when I'm playing such involved, creative, and fun tracks like 3DS Toad Circuit. Yeah, if there's any tracks you want to make look good, it's the basic ones. Especially the most basic ones. Toad Circuit was a beginner track, so I can understand why it didn't go overboard with the theming. But when it's literally being bung back as a course in one of the best-selling Mario Kart games of all time, in the same game as the best starter course in the series, it's going to have to pull its own weight. Instead, it doubled down. Every single thing in this track that's not the sky or the giant toad balloons, which is the only redeeming aspect by the way, looks both worse than the original version on the 3DS, and bad. The road, too bright. The cliffs, bad. The hills in the background, boring. The stands, dull. The grass, why didn't you use the same grass as Shroom Ridge? I'm fine with flat textures, but flat textures that are colored like complete ass is a problem. This would be one thing on a track that's actually interesting in layout, as certain upcoming tracks will prove, but on such a basic circuit track, it stands out way more. There's little substance and the style sucks. Nintendo's decision to add Toad Circuit was already walking on eggshells, and what they did with the track cracked them. I'm already not big on adding more beginner circuits in the same game as Mario Kart Stadium, especially since I'm pretty sure that if you're deciding to buy $25 DLC for a game, you probably don't need yet another beginner track to show you the ropes. But because of how bad they made the track look, it made me go from not caring about Toad Circuit to not liking it. Even putting aside the fact that much better 3DS beginner course could have gone in this spot could have also been used for a version of Toad Circuit that actually looks good. Now I just feel bad for the Toad balloons. If we're going to remove this track from the game, can I have permission to take them and put the 3 of them over my house? I'd appreciate having them on a bad day. And since I'm making demands, make a Toadette balloon as well. Make 5 of them. Add a seat and a steering wheel on one of them so I can ride it and use it to conquer the entire world. Oh, and speaking of the entire world, the transition I want to use for the next track would give it away instantly with the topic I plan to start it with, so instead of poking at an easy target for any longer, I'm going to rework this segment and instead talk about one of the other most contentious topics of the entire DLC, the 14 city tracks, aka Nintendo found an easy way to fill 14 slots. Oh boy are these controversial. Some people really like them and think they provide fun gameplay and creative nods to the cities they reference. Others resent them for taking up so much space in the past with boring, realistic, confusing layouts based on places they're not even sure exist. I'm slightly in the middle in terms of the two camps. To be more specific, I'm perfectly fine with city tracks and I always enter them with an open mind. And yet I still found half of them to be mediocre. Look, to put it bluntly, when you have 14 tracks that mostly all hit the same beats, it makes them all a lot less special. If each Store City track was the only one that existed in the game, I would probably rank that one a bit higher than I would otherwise. I guess as a side effect of oversaturation, and honestly it seems a bit mean, but this still doesn't change the fact there's a lot of stuff here that started off mid and got even midder due to what's around them. Again, I'm not biased against these tracks, it's just that a lot of them are biased against being interesting. That being said, one city track transcends just being mid and actually ends up sucking. And surprisingly for once, that one city is in Tokyo.
I'm going to be so boring, Michael will get so fed up, he'll go back to bed.
Oh, of course it was the British one. London Loop is the epitome of all problems that city tracks have. Mainly, it's not visually exciting, it's outwardly generic, and it's so fucking long, forgettable, and boring. Apparently people were impressed with how this track looks compared to the previous city tracks, and I guess it's better in terms of how much effort they put into the presentation. The foggy sky supports the color scheme more than the bright clear sky the tour version had, so I guess it's also an upgrade in that regard. But I'm sorry, I just find the visuals here to be boring as hell. I really hope this isn't how London actually looks, because here every building just blends into each other with their similar color scheme of either beige or brown. If I have to actively look for your landmarks in your city track, that's a problem. I can slightly excuse the visuals for just not being my thing, but I can't excuse the gameplay. Earlier I said that all the landmarks were barely visible and that's one thing, but then the track goes the extra mile of literally containing nothing else to make up for that. A lot of the city tracks have sections that blend into each other when you're spending a lot of time just driving down the city streets. That's a bit of an issue, but most of them at least try to mix it up by at least having colorful visuals and introducing some unique set piece or landmark you go through in certain areas. Rome has you start in the Stone Stadium, New York has you enter a parking garage for the final lap, Bangkok has you go through a river and has multiple levels of elevation. Hell, fucking Tokyo, the city track usually considered to be the worst, at least looks more visually vibrant and has you build up to an expressway on the final lap. Here in London, there's a marketplace you go through in the first 20 seconds. I guess that's a visually different and interesting set piece. Would have been nice if it ever showed up again. There's James John's present. Apparently there are references to the Queen's corgis. Damn, I guess the British Empire is still going on. Apart from that, there's nothing. Not only is so much of this track just road, but it's road in cramped city streets with no off-road present, which is bad enough on its own, but then you remember this is a multi-lap city course, so not only does it suffer from lack of memorability even harder because you drive on each part less than usual, but it also means that said boring sections are even longer. Lap 2, which is based on London Loop 2 in Tour, is the worst offender of this. After avoiding a few chain chomps, literally the next 25 seconds contain no hazards, no obstacles, not even really anything to look at since so much of it is closed in. It's infused with figure 8 spirit, and it's by far one of the most boring sections in any track in any Mario Kart. And the last lap, despite trying to ramp it up with the disconnected chain chomps, still ends the track on a bore. When a brick road is the point of interest in your track, you're doing something wrong. Despite all the shit I've thrown at it, there is one redeeming quality to all this, the music being British rock music. The original in Tour was pretty cool conceptually, but it sounded kinda unfinished. This remix freshens it up and makes it sound a lot better. I do admit it sounds kinda similar to Rock Mountain, which is not helped by both of them being in the same cup. but I like Rock Mountain's music too, so I'm fine with that. If this track just got some basic city music, or even classical tea drinking tunes, the feeling that it would have given me would have landed it below Toad Circuit. Good music aside, this is still a crap track. I think it was probably a go of Nintendo to preserve all the city tracks, so they had to include it since bringing every tour track but one would be stupid. So instead, my requests go all the way back to the tour developers to tell them to future-proof their mobile game tracks in case it ever ends up in the 6th best-selling game of all time. Alright, that's all the D tiers done with. On to the C tiers, which happen to be much more plentiful than the 6 in the base game ranking. Not a good outlook for capitalism. Yeah, that's right. For once in a Booster Course Pass ranking, Tokyo Blur is in D tier. And that is the most positive thing that I have to say about it. God damn is this track though. Pretty much no landmarks or alternate settings are used for the entire track, and on top of that the layout is just a boring circle for all 3 laps. The first 2 are barely indistinguishable aside from some swamps on lap 2, and lap 3 does at least mix things up by having you drive on an expressway, but that one makes you lose out on the only piece of off-road and even a shortcut ramp. Not to mention that the new walls make it so you can't even see the city around you. At the very least, the town itself looks passable, as I said when I was talking about London Loop. Sure, it suffers from Wave 1 textures and presentation, but it does at least have a good color scheme, take notes Toad Circuit, and there's no area where you're just super cramped in with similar looking buildings. For a track being compared to London Loop, it looks pretty good. As a track itself, it's whatever. And as a Tokyo track, it's super underwhelming. If there's anything Rubble Trouble Tokyo taught me, it's that there's 2 things Tokyo is known for: bright neon cityscapes and cherry blossom gardens. Oh, and toxic work culture. Seriously, could you at least not put in one cherry blossom tree? Even with the landmarks, the vibes are all off. You could claim this is an American city and I'd believe you. What I'm saying is that this is basically a short version of London Loop. Too much road, not enough interest. This is still more interesting than that track, but I would not blame anyone who thinks this is worse. Because when the act of putting this track at the bottom of C tier is seen by the public as giving it too much credit, you fucked up. And if you're wondering why I'm even only putting this in C tier instead of D, it's because it's short and you can smash your cranium into the finish line.
Oh, there's undeniable proof that the Holocaust happened.
Berlin Byways is also pretty dull. At the very least, it has some sections that aren't just roads, like a park and a train station, even if going inside this train without hitting a wall is pretty much impossible. And there's even a recreation of the communism wall with swamps in them. According to Nintendo, communism was never overthrown, it just fell on its own trying to kill oncoming racers. Aside from getting some juicy German lore of varying trustability, not much else present. The city isn't that visually interesting, blending in with a lot of the earlier and later cities. Design-wise, it's still just a bunch of long, uninteresting roads, a lot of which head scarily into Tokyo territory, honestly. I mean, Christ, the track literally starts with a 5-second long straightaway. They're not even trying to hide what this track really is. At the very least, Nintendo must have realized this track's layout is pretty barren, so they threw in some traffic on most of the roads. Unfortunately, they're bad day on Toad's Turnpike difficulty, but at least it gives you something to look at and look out for. You know, London and Tokyo could have used these as well. Okay, I'll try to stop bullying those 2 for now. They also made sure to give it some banger music too. Seriously, I have no clue why Nintendo has never tried techno orchestral music before, unless they have in some other game I haven't played. I do admit I do like the tour version more for being more of a straight banger, while the 8 Deluxe version sounds more like it's trying to recreate said banger. But it's still probably one of the best songs we got in the DLC. It's pretty much the only part of this track I call interesting, honestly. Berlin Byways, it gave us communism and took away 2 minutes of our life. Don't know what else in the Mario series has done that. Los Angeles Laps is a slightly better version of Berlin Byways, which was a slightly better version of Tokyo Blur, which is a slightly better version of London Loop. Are you sensing a pattern yet? Look, I swear there's city tracks in this game that I like, but this is not one of them. I mean, I like how the beach looks. It's very rare that we get a beach track that's based on a coastline instead of an island. Definitely the best part of the track. Then once we leave that part, it then just goes back into committing a lot of the earlier city crimes like the ones I just mentioned. I mean, look at this straightaway. Good lord. Isn't Los Angeles the host of Hollywood? You know, one of the largest entertainment districts in the world? And isn't a video game, by definition, a media which is used to entertain? Would it have been too much to ask for part of the city to reference something like a movie studio, or the Walk of Fame, or even just a parody of the Hollywood logo in the background? Look, Burnout Paradise can do it, so can Mario Kart. I don't know, I think it would have been more interesting than the final lap consisting of nothing but oil rigs. At least this is something unique to this track and this track only, but I'm not sure how this is meant to be a love letter to Californians. Doesn't help that the track is pretty much over by the time this section is over. I can't recall the last time I went on a holiday to a place and it ended with a reason never to visit there again. The stadium we fly into on lap 2 is a neat touch at least, though I mostly remember it for the hilarious sight of tilted coins in an official Mario Kart level, though I'm admittedly a lot less cheery about the cramped street that comes up right afterwards. It's literally just placed onto the environment on a pedestal. What is this country doing? While this city track is ever so slightly better than the previous 3, I can't say the same about the music. It's not bad sounding, it actually sounds pretty good. It's just kinda generic. I bring this up because Tour's version was not generic and was completely terrible. And I honestly kinda grooved to it while it was coming out of my phone speaker. I'm not saying they should have kept the music sounding like Tour's, though they could have 100% kept the vocals, as that was 100% not the problem with the original song. But the better quality does make it less memorable, if that makes any sense. Los Angeles Labs is at least trying, but it ends up being yet another city that contains way too many long periods of time doing not much. When I was playing Wave 5 for the first time, I was starting to experience Tour City burnout, and I can't say this track helped. It certainly deserved better than the initial D I gave it as a result though, since it does have some redeeming elements, but not much beyond that.
New York is
Up your ass.
Again, I swear I'm fine with cities. There are 2 cities in the A tier. There might even be 3 after I record this. Stop calling me biased. Points to New York Minute for at least topping the mid-city beatdown by being at night instead of day. I like it when my city tracks are at night. Point to the track that should have been in 8 Deluxe instead of Dry Dickbag. New York and Tokyo were the first 2 city tracks to be added to Tour, and I can easily tell that because both these tracks have the similar problem of first 2 laps are near identical and the 3rd lap just takes you somewhere else entirely. Also, we're short. This track is certainly better though, since at the very least there's obstacles on the track to avoid, like these entirely static taxis on a straightaway that don't really redeem it, and these Goombas on the pass you go on twice. And while the actual driving in the 3rd lap isn't special, pops on the idea of going into a hotel, even if we're just going into the parking garage. Honestly, now I wish we had an entire track based on a hotel. That'd be kinda
nice of the print.
Also again, I like the aesthetic of cities at night, so I do think this track stands out in terms of visuals, though I don't know why everyone is overrunning their power bill. And dead. Man, I am not selling this track, am I? I do wish it was a little bit less bright to make it feel more moody as New York is apparently. Same goes with deciding to pick generic AI generated jazz theme for the music. I think Nintendo thought they were making a new Donk City track. Hey, I made a mashup about that. That, or they decided to just lean into the Broadway feeling without actually having to put anything related to Broadway in the track. I mean, there's advertisements for Broadway musicals, but we can't actually have that in the track because then it would be way too interesting. A lot more could have been done with the idea of being in New York at night, and on top of that, it's pretty empty. It's pointless, but it does get some points for being slightly distinct in visuals, because at the end of the day, that's all I want from these types of tracks.
Go away! It's still there!
Oh great, now we're 6 in a row now and... Oh wait, never mind, we don't have a city track this time. Ain't that a relief? Alright, let's instead talk about... Fuck. Alright, why isn't this track number 49? I have my reasons, and I am not happy about that. Let's get the obvious problem out of the way first. The track shouldn't be in the game. I can understand putting in a SNES Mario Circuit track for all the remember your roots shit, but like, the fact it's just a faithful SNES remake, while at the very least the SNES tracks in the base game and the SNES track that will come 4 waves later at least try to look different, is a bit dumb. But I could have let it slide for reasons I'll get into later. But why did you pick number 3? I mean, the reason is obvious. It was in Wii, so they wanted to bank on nostalgia for Wii heads, as a lot of the other choices in this past would indicate. However, that reason was actually the reason it shouldn't have been picked in the first place. It was already in the previous best-selling game in the series. I think enough people are already familiar with it. Not only that, but the other 3 Mario Circuits present in Super Kart had better reasons to be in this pass. Mario Circuit 2 would have been in a similar boat to 3, but at least 7 didn't sell as much as Wii and isn't as popular, and it was only on a handheld. Plus it has a glider ramp, which admittedly wouldn't have been as cool with 8's gliding physics, but at least it's something. Mario Circuit 4 would have been the actual best choice for a Mario Circuit to return, since it's the only one that hasn't appeared as a retro sans Super Circuit. Except that also means it wasn't in Tour, which would have put it out of Nintendo's reach. But like, just add the track to both games, it would take like 10 seconds to do so. Hell, Mario Circuit 1 is a worse track and it would have been a worse choice, but at least there's some novelty in the best selling game having the first track in the whole series. Mario Circuit 3 has nothing. Second only to Sunset Wilds, it's by far one of the worst and most baffling choices in the entire BCP. But that being said, at least it's turny. Yeah, the thing is with this track is that I honestly hate the fact the track is here more than the actual track itself. And I do admit that this track does at least kind of work well with 8 Deluxe's handling. I said that chaining together turns in this game is fun, and that applies here, and the flatness helps with that a bit honestly, sorta like with GBA Mario Circuit. Of course, that can only get you so far when every turn looks the same, but I'm just saying. And while it's annoying that this variant was only chosen because of its appearance in Wii, I think I actually like it in this game more. I mean, Ultimate Battle of Mid, but I think it's a factor of 8 Deluxe having more satisfying drifting to take all the turns with, and I also think the visuals here are better. They're not good per se, those clouds are weird as hell, but I think they're a lot more vibrant and bright than Wii's, and instead of just upscaling the SNES background and leaving it at that, they at least tried to spice it up with actual model trees, flag posts, and actual spectators on brick platforms. You know, the bare minimum. And that's about all that was added, and it's still ungodly bland. Hey, at least they knew to respect its origins, and they gave the OG classic Mario Circuit theme a nice big band remix to fully celebrate where it all started. Oh wait, they didn't. Hey, you know how I said that Dry Dry Desert had the second worst remix in the game? This was what dethroned it. I legitimately think the GBA version sounded better. I know there's a lot of people that actually really like this track because of the layout, judging by how many times I've seen it picked online, and I'll give them credit. It's an alright layout that can sometimes be fun, but just because I mildly enjoy driving on it does not give it a free pass for existing. It's far from the worst track in the game, and that makes me depressed.
Identity theft is not a joke, Jim.
We've seen GBA remakes that saw out the original concept and replace it with something even better. We've seen GBA remakes that saw out the original concept and replace it with something not as good as what it used to be, but still good in its own right. Now, we have a GBA remake that throws out the original concept and replaces it with something boring as fuck. I'm not even gonna talk about the fact the original Sky Garden is one of the best tracks from Super Circuit and is one of the very few tracks that actually have a magical feel even in 2D. Whatever this track used to be is irrelevant to the point I'm making. This is just a brand new track with the exact same name. What does this entirely replaced version of it offer? Very good music, and that's about it. GBA tracks have had their layout changed before, but this is a whole new level. This isn't just a simplification, this is a poor recreation from memory. It feels so short now, and a far cry from the turns available in the original that made it so complex. And as for the shortcuts that were also sick, one of them is at least replaced with the obligatory mushroom cut, but there's also this leaf shortcut that's not actually a shortcut because you go faster by going around. I mean, I think. But even if it is faster to go on the leaves, it's more satisfying drifting around it compared to looking at how slowly you get bounced on the leaves. I could have slightly accepted the track being simplified into mushroom cup difficulty if it at least kept its heavenly aesthetic, but it didn't, or at least we only got the general pitch of it. Instead of the green plant road from the original, now we have an orange road which doesn't even look slightly as good, which is one thing, but then it also turns out that Toad's version instead has a grey road that ties the visuals together to a much more appealing scheme, and now I wish the track also looked like that too. I'm not saying the orange road looks bad on its own, but it's my least favorite Sky Garden road that has ever Sky Gardened. As for the rest of it, it certainly looks like it's going for the same thing, but I feel like the overtly bright and undetailed visuals detract from the feeling and make it feel more generic. Especially with how much it's trying to be Cloudtop Cruise with all the airships added. You know, even though it's in the same game as Cloudtop Cruise now. Did you at least keep the Luigi blimp? Well, I mean, if you're gonna keep the blimp, you also have to remake GBA Luigi Circuit and, you know, do all those changes I requested of you in the first video. Heck, even the music makes it feel less special. I mean, it's still one of the best tracks in the game, but that's mostly because the song it was arranging literally could not be ruined even with the less fitting big band theme. I think it sounded more heavenly as a sense tune. Also, the mushroom here feels wrong. That or I'm just bad, but I swear tricking right before the mushroom results in some whack shit happening most of the time. I don't know. Compared to the previous Sky Garden, it's a noticeable downgrade in some areas and an insurmountable one in others. Not comparing it, it's a passable but not too exciting track. Both sides balance out to leave a course that's just meh. It's kind of disappointing that we couldn't have gotten the OG Sky Garden, but we didn't. But moreover, I'm just disappointed that we were just given a boring track. In general.
Don't wanna be a Canadian idiot.
Vancouver is apparently a pretty beloved city and I don't get it. Well, I mean, I did get it, but then as the race went on, I no longer got it, and then I really didn't get it. To put it bluntly, the reason this city fails for me is because of the poor choice in lap layout. The first lap is genuinely quite cool. After going under some cool looking blue bars, you go over a suspension bridge in a forest that's actually in full anti-gravity, complete with twists and turns. It doesn't last too long, but it's genuinely really fun to go through this, and the scenery is nothing like the other city tracks. It certainly caught my attention the first time playing through it, and I was into it. Then after a glide back into the main meat of the track, the second lap has you going through the park. Layout here is not as interesting, but I guess it's still visually distinct. And afterwards you go through the ice rink, which is an interesting set piece, even if the direction you have to go isn't the most easy to tell. Not the most interesting thing in the world, but it's still pretty alright and still keeps up the momentum for the surprisingly great start. And then lap 3 is one of the worst city laps in the game. Start was an extra long straightaway. Boy, how I missed those in my cities. And then a tunnel, which is kind of a step down from the previous set pieces, but I guess I'll take it over another street for a long period of time. Oh, for fuck's sake. And then we're back in the ice rink for some reason, leaving using a different exit, which I guess explains why the one in the second lap was so hard to take. And then the track's over. How deflating. I'm not exaggerating about the impact of this ending. If lap C was changed to be different, or they rearranged the lap so that the first lap comes last or just after the third lap, this might have rocketed up to mid or high B, because it has so much promise with not just the first lap, but the aesthetic too. It has a nice visual style with stuff like the aurora in the night sky, and then it also has very good music. But the fact it blows all its great aspects at the start and ends on a flat note means it's not one that I'm going back to. Because like, what's the point of really getting into the start if I know the track has nothing left to show me afterwards? So depressing. This could have been a great follow-up to Singapore from the previous wave. Honestly, I think the two tracks should have swapped positions, so that Vancouver would have had less to live up to. As it is right now, Canada isn't impressing me.
Nintendo!
Hey, remember how 2 years ago in Deluxe we only had 3 Wii courses? Now look at the game. Common talking points, I'm aware, but we did not need 8 Wii courses in one pass. DS only got 4, 7 only got 4, and Double Dash only got 3, yet Wii got even more courses than there are waves. As someone whose second favorite Mario Kart is Wii, having half the track list of that game being in this game was not necessary, especially with how much I go back to Wii due to the modding scene. But I get it, Wii had a great roster of tracks with many fan favorites. As such, I could kinda understand going to that game to peel a lot of tracks from it, even if they did go overboard. And hey, at least they didn't go too far and pick any of the 2 basic bitch beginner circuits. Instead, we got the Isik Itch intermediate circuit. Daisy Circuit was to many the straw that broke the Yoshi's back, and I don't exactly blame them. I used to kinda like this track, but over time, with the help of it getting added to Deluxe, it shrunk on me. Not by a huge amount, but it's gone over the edge of whatever now. The atmosphere was good, being one of the few times the yellow sunset actually works, and the statues were really cute, but the track itself was really basic and lacking off-road. Even though I didn't start not caring about this track until afterwards, I still wasn't particularly clamoring for its inclusion in a future Mario Kart game even back then. Especially one which was already overflowing with Wii tracks. So thank God they saved it for the final wave to the point of it being the track they used for the direct announcement. I can understand this being in the first Wii waves, but why number 6? Well, in terms of the course itself, it's still the same track, I guess. I like the new remix of the new skybox. In terms of other changes, I don't like that the statues are now completely gold and faceless. That's a shame, makes them a bit less cute. Also, the added ramp after the tunnel is just tacky. I get if you wanted to make the world more interesting, but the fact it's just a ramp unnaturally added onto the track makes it stand out in a not good way. Same with the overtly large boost panels added afterwards, though it is kinda satisfying to take the first one and use the boost to speed on the inside. Also, they put a piranha plant cutout in front of the pretty creative staircase shortcut. I guess it's to make it less easy to take without a mushroom. Honestly, since they turned that part into a glider, they made it a lot less interesting than in the Wii version, since it takes longer to get to the ground, leaving you unable to take more turns, which is the most fun part of the track. I know that sounds like a weird and nitpicky complaint. Daisy Circuit looks okay and can occasionally be enjoyable to drive on, but in a game like this with other better circuit tracks, it does not serve much purpose to me. As such, I don't really have much reason to want to play on it not only over other tracks, but even other circuits. So with that in mind, it should be obvious that this was not necessary to bring back when you've already chosen so many Wii tracks already. Give some other games a chance instead of an average port of an average track from a game you're already milking. And don't think DS is getting away from porting its boring circuits either. Well, before I do that, I will slightly defend DS Mario Circuit against the claims of murdering Airship Fortress. I mean, don't get me wrong, that track was robbed of its spot, and while it sucks that this track technically took the spot that Airship Fortress rightfully deserved, there's plenty of other unnecessary tracks from other games that could have been replaced instead that I just talked about. Especially when you consider that Airship Fortress was already in 7, so it was at least in one other mainline entry compared to this one. We could have both. 5 DS tracks sounds way more fair than 4, especially considering how many Wii tracks there are. Actually heck, since we just talked about it, Daisy Circuit would also be a good track to swap out for Airship Fortress. I know Daisy Circuit also never showed up in the mainline game before, but so has 3 other Wii tracks in this past, so it's not like it's missing out on newer rivals. Less Wii oversaturation, and more DS tracks. Plus Airship being such a fan favorite, it would have made Wave 6 even more hype. I mean, there would probably be outcry over the orange skybox, but losing the purple sky in favor of Airship being here at all would be a sacrifice I'd be willing to make. And furthermore, oh wait, I meant to be talking about Mario Circuit. And furthermore, Airship Fortress and Tour has this really cool looking bar area. Look, I know this Mario Circuit has a lot of defenders, and I can just barely see it. The layout is more complex than your usual Mario Crow, mostly due to it originally being a StarCraft track for some bloody reason. And there's stuff like Fire Piranha plans, a pipe that leads into a small forest, complete with a Wiggler coming out on the later laps. There is cool stuff here, and the color scheme is pretty vibrant, way better than the likes of Toad Circuit. When it comes to all the Mario Circuits across the series, this is certainly one of the more interesting ones. By default. I can't beat around the bush, this is still just like most of the others. Wow, green stuff, Goombas, grandstands, Princess Peach's castle. I've never seen those in a circuit track before, especially not a Mario circuit. I know some people will probably be a bit pissed that I'm throwing out perfectly good gameplay for a bland theme, but why in the world would I pick a track with good gameplay but crap theme over a track with good gameplay and good theme? Look, being better than the game's own Mario Circuit is not much of an accomplishment, that's all I'm saying. And honestly, GBA Mario Circuit having no theme makes it more interesting than DS Mario Circuit having a bland theme. I'm not joking, that's actually how I feel about the two. GBA Mario Circuit being in the middle of nowhere makes it more distinct amongst Mario Circuits. At least GBA doesn't have Peach's Castle or Goombas, instead it has a large turn and a pit stop, like no other Mario Circuit has had before. That's pretty much my only justification for gassing up GBA but not DS. I'm not falling for DS Mario Circuit propaganda. I'll move it up a bit since it's not completely boring like many of its circuit contemporaries in this past, but that's it. And one final nitpick for the road, I can understand not bothering to make the castle grounds drivable in N64 Royal Raceway since that would take a lot of effort. But seriously, you couldn't have removed this gate and made the 4 meters of bridge drivable? Imagine how many Nintendo YouTubers would be pogging over this very minor Easter egg you didn't want to include. Terrible marketing decision if I do say so myself. Oh, if you really don't want to add collision detection, just remove the gate and have people just fall out of bounds when they attempt to drive on it. That'll also get the YouTube talking. Ask Sega. I stated before that I do love Mario Kart Wii. Clearly not as much as Nintendo does, but I think its Nitro Track selection is some of the best in the series, with many outstanding classics that still hold up today. And I used to outright hate one of them. I don't even know why, I think I just discovered that Chuggaacrayz was a fan favorite amongst the community, and I was a bit surprised about that as I never really cared about it much myself. And combined with the fact that I was pretty bad at it, especially in the tube and ending turn, I thought, hey, you know what would be an interesting opinion to have? Chuggaacrayz being one of the worst tracks in the game, even worse than Luigi Circuit. Anyway, after a bunch of people calling me stupid in one act of arson, I eventually got over my edgy phase and grew to really enjoy this one like everyone else. I mean, it's still not one of my absolute favorites from this game, mostly due to tough competition, but it's still a very solid track with some damn memorable set pieces, most notably being the fast-paced river section and the beautiful atmospheric aquarium tube with the flowing water and the zappers. And what also helped me figure out Chuggaacrayz's appeal was Nintendo continuously porting this track to every game and continuously making it worse to the point where it's not even good in this game anymore. I mean, the river still functions at least, but it's been downgraded so. And I mean downgraded in size, it's way more cramped compared to the original. Not sure why they decided that this specific track should be the one that's scaled smaller. But I guess you could still try to take the satisfying turns like usual, you'd just be sent into the off-road more often. What I'm upset over is the loss of the funny Koopa signs telling you to go left or right. Don't you want a funny Koopa Troopa PNG telling you where to go? Okay, but seriously, why was the giant Koopa sign at the start removed? That was an actual iconic part of the track, could you at least not replace it with the usual Koopa render you guys always use? Also in terms of worse aesthetics. Jesus, why did they decide to make all the rocks orange instead of gray? I mean, at least they're textured, but they're so ugly compared to the original gray that I expect to see. Also, the part in the cave before the river is now too dark and the grass is Toad Circuit color. Honest to god, this track looks worse than most of Wave 1, which is saying something. What about the tube section, aka the best part of the original track? It's completely mangled. Instead of the sensation of rushing through a tube with the flowing water and seeing the ocean floor around, now we have a generic underwater section with nothing in it. This was something that was added in 7, but at least they tried to make it less boring with cheat sheets that are kinda maybe a hazard. Now they're gone, and instead there's anti-gravity boosters, and there's also an unnecessary half-pipe that usually results in you driving into a wall. That is, if you're not already driving into the wall thanks to how small this pipe is and how jank it is now. They removed the best part of the course and replaced it with something that's now the worst part of the course. Why? Though speaking of Mario Kart 7, at least they got rid of that unnecessary glider ramp. I guess that's one positive change I wants to see of Shesh. There are still some sections that I find enough, but now that the best sections of the track are either nerfed or removed entirely in favor of something I don't find fun, I can't really say I like this track in this state. C tier might seem harsh, but I really don't have a use for this version. Listen, if you're not bringing back the tube, you're not bringing back Chuggaacrayz. You're bringing back a hollow shell of its former self. So if you're planning to keep putting its corpse on the bench for every future Mario Kart game, stop it. Take it to a sermon and revive it into its original form. Please. Also, in case anyone's keeping track, this is the best track in the Cherry Cup. So in case you need to put 2 and 2 together, the Cherry Cup is my least favorite cup in the entire game. For comparison, my second least favorite cup is Banana, and even that has 2 tracks I like in it. Meanwhile here, none of the 4 tracks are even decent. Instead, this cup contains butchered, dysfunctional, boring, and that's already funny on its own. But the other cup in Wave 5, the Feather Cup, is the best cup in the BCP, and it comes before the Cherry Cup. So all in all, I'm fairly certain that Wave 5 is an SCP. Alright, so they ruined the graphics of one track by making all the gray rocks orange. Hopefully that was the first and only time they did the... Hey Nintendo, if you're bringing back the gliding mechanic for 7, and you're making it so that gliding isn't as satisfying or as free as in 7, it's probably not the best idea to bring back the track that's basically all gliding and nothing else. I mean, I get it, Rock Mountain and the Rock Cup. I'm willing to bet whoever was in charge of naming these cups had a favorite course. I mean, it doesn't even work over here because it's called Alpine Pass, and this game doesn't have an Alpine Cup. Anyway, not sure why this track was brought back. It really benefited from the freedom you got in 7 once you took off, and that was the track's main appeal. It certainly wasn't the kind of bland theming the track had, which was a problem in 7, but made even worse here was them deciding to do the same thing they would later do with Chuggaacrayz and make the detailed gray mountainscape into an ugly orange rockscape. It doesn't look as bad as Chuggaacrayz, but it's getting there, and it kinda dampens the impact of the initial big glide due to how bland everything looks now. I mean, they have gray rocks in the tunnel, which is the least bad looking part of the track. Why not apply that same texture to the entire mountain? The only reason I don't have this ranked lower is because of this track's only other quality, the shortcuts. The windpipe you can use to extend your glide, the mass amount of grass that gives me flashbacks to N64 Mario Raceway, and the ending section with even more windpipes you can use to straight up skip past the finish line and end up in the next tunnel. A lot like the ones in Neo Bowser City, honestly. It provides a good amount of excitement to this otherwise bland course. Also, the music is still as good as it was in 7, which is nice because the extreme hill jumping is about the only theme this track has. It's not the worst choice they could have picked from 7, especially since they actually did pick a worse choice, but I still wouldn't really say this was worthy to bring back, especially in an environment that doesn't really benefit it. I don't exactly understand why this one had a fan favorite status back then, but considering even those fans aren't happy with this port, that says a lot. But you can do cool shortcuts on it, so that saves it from being much lower. Okay, I swear, this is the last city track I think is mid. Which hey, we still have half the cities left to go, so that's exciting. Anyway, Rome track. Obviously harkening back to Mario and Luigi's Italian heritage. That's nice and all, but I'm wondering if they should have gone further and made Brooklyn Boulevard as well. Alternate universe propositions aside, how's the track? I'm not kidding, I have absolutely nothing to say about Rome Avanti. It might honestly be the track I have the least to say about in the entire game. The only real thought I have about it is that the Stone Stadium is underused, only showing up twice and very quickly at that, while everywhere else is just a regular nighttime city, which at least looks pretty pleasant. That's a negative of the track, but at least it's an actual thought that I have about this track. Apart from that, that's a cool shortcut. I like how there's fuzzies present, that's a good Mario enemy. I like that there's a pizza shop, but why are there no pizza pictures on the store itself? How do I know that this isn't a scam? Look, at least with other tracks I sometimes forget about, at least they're unique in theme. There's only one Dragon Driftway in the game, but there's 4 other nighttime cities in this game, so if I have nothing to say about one of them, I'm gonna mark it as mid as a result. Honestly, aside from the releases of the cities themselves in Tour, this had no reason to be a Wave 6 track. It would have fit in the middle of the pass, but not here. I just don't know. This track is nothing to me. Nothing good, but nothing bad either. It's the perfect representation of the bridge from C to B, where coherent thoughts go to die. You know, since I just gave it away, that means we're moving on to B tiers. Hey, remember in the first ranking when I reached this tier before leaving the 40s?
Koopas.
I can't believe it. An entire 7 cities, half of the selection of them in the game, were outdone by the tutorial. Yeah, I actually don't mind Paris Promenade. Maybe it's just nostalgia talking, considering this was the first Booster Course Pass track, and therefore my first time ever playing new Mario Kart content outside of Tour. But what really made me commit to moving this into the decent zone was just it kind of being laid back. And I'm not just talking about atmosphere, though I do admit that the mood here is pretty well set and very much like Paris. And it's also one of the better looking Wave 1 tracks, which is basically code for, if I squint this looks good, but if I take a magnifying glass to everything, ew. But no, what I'm talking about is the track design itself, which surprisingly does exist. Compared to how most of the other cities are just 3 tracks merged together, Paris Promenade is instead entirely based on one layout. As such, you're given more time to get familiar and remember that one layout as opposed to having to remember 3 different ones for most other cities. That wouldn't be worth praising if said layout was bad, but it's not. The track's intro has a mushroom shortcut that you obviously can't use if you're just getting off the starting line, but you can use to great effect in the later laps. Then after a turn you have a big split decision to make. Either you can go under this metal tower where the boost panels lay, or you can go left and take a neat little detour with this pipe area that I originally saw was off-road. And there's a giant piranha plant present as well, my favorite part of Paris. And that's pretty much it in terms of layout. Except maybe not, because in the final lap, the track throws you for a loop and forces you to go backwards. Keep in mind, this was the first tour city we saw in Deluxe, so this kind of lap changing shit was unheard of in this game. Unless you count Grumble Volcano falling apart as a different variant of the track, which... no. And it honestly really freshens up the track. You get to see a whole new perspective on the course, up to even getting to the side and take the split pass again, but backwards. There's even a glider ramp on one road which seems pointless at first, until you realize they put a coin on an umbrella in the off-road. Yeah, that's right. They put one single tiny coin in an area you'd never think to go to otherwise. And you can even use that umbrella to trick you off. Isn't that so slay? Okay, obviously a layout this simple, despite being enjoyable, isn't gonna win any awards. But does it really have to? You have to keep in mind that this was not only the first ever Tour City track, but the first track in the BCP in general. Its purpose was to give us a proper introduction to what these genres have to offer, and I think it does so in a pretty commendable way. It shows you the ability to change between laps in a way that will catch your attention, and on top of that, the track itself is pretty alright. I think its placement as the very first course in the DLC is definitely the reason why I'm more positive than negative on this one, especially in combination with how this one in particular handles the gimmick, and more importantly, how it handles showing off the gimmick. Like, New York Minute was also pretty short, and it was also the first Tour City that was created at all, but it being the intro to the BCP wouldn't have worked as well because the changing laps just happened there. While in Paris, they keep that info secret at first, and then BAM, you're going the other way on the final lap. Paris Promenade has only one job to do, and considering it did that job, I'm giving it plaudits for that. And with this in mind, with such a good choice for the introductory course in the BCP, why did they still feel the need to also bring back Toad Circuit?
Thank you for turning this child to me. You want another one by any chance?
People are so mean to Rosalina's Ice World. Like, extremely so. I feel like a lot of that has to do with the track being in Wave 6, and in fact being the last one revealed for the game in terms of the Wave reveal trailers. I can understand where it's coming from, but come on guys, cut it some slack. It was a better 3DS choice than 2 of the other picks. Out of 4. Where the fuck is Maka-Woohoo? Anyway, yeah, this one's fine. I really like the concept of it, being a nice level set in space. And I think it definitely hits what it's going for with the darker color of purple and blue. Mostly blue. Good god, look at this cave, it's so blue. That would be an issue, especially considering the slightly more rich palette this track had in 7. Except I actually like the color blue, so you know what? Blew it up. The night sky looks great, the recreation of the observatory at the starting line is a nice aesthetic touch, and oh my god, the music is so beautiful. It single-handedly raises this track by so many places than it would be if it had like Sherbetland's music. I mean, the atmosphere, the distorted and clueless yet hopeful instrumentation, and just the sheer power of it. I was already a huge fan of 7's music, but this arrangement here makes that version sound empty, which probably made it more fitting for the more mysterious and dark vibe the track was going for in the original. But since the visuals here are brighter, I guess there was no point in keeping the music dark to match, so they just lit it the fuck up. So with all these good things I have to say about it, why is it comparatively pretty low in the ranking? Well, that has mostly to do with the track itself. It's kinda empty. I know that's the point, but there isn't really one major thing on the track itself that really stands out for me or interests me in terms of racing. Well, aside from one part that I'm fairly certain was unintentional, but I'll get to that later. As an example, the inside of the cave doesn't have much to offer aside from a couple ice pillars and an alternate pass that's honestly a lot more enjoyable to take. Not every part of every track needs to be filled to the brim with obstacles, but there definitely could have been cooler stuff done here. If NCC4 Sherbert Land has a more interesting ice cave than you, that's a cause for concern. I would also criticize this opening term for being too long and containing nothing, but turns out it does contain something. A shit camera. The most interesting part of the design for me is the underwater cabin with the ice on top, as this is a split pass. And going back to the visuals, I love the look of the purple ice in the little houses, plus the penguins scooting around the water. I should know that Rosalina likes penguins too. Even this part isn't without its downsides though, as the top pass reminds me too much of a straightaway. I appreciate the safe versus style design choice between the ice and water pass, but that doesn't mean you have to make the safe pass completely empty. While that sounds kinda lame, how you handle these pads is what makes this part actually interesting. At first it seems like a typical don't fall in the hole section, but then in the later laps the intro to the ice pass melts away and now you're forced into the water instead. At first I wasn't a fan of the choice being taken away from you, only for me to discover that you can actually make it if you're on 200cc, or you use a mushroom, or you do a super mini turbo on a perfectly calculated angle, and let me tell ya, getting the ability to go on that pass in the later laps is satisfying as fuck. Which was funny, since that pass was the less interesting of the two. I actually thought this was something new to this version, and it's something I actually praised this specific version for, and it turns out this was always the case, even in 7. So oops. Oh well, I'd still say it's more fun here since the half-pipes can give you a speed boost you can try and chain off of. To sum up, Rosalina's Ice World is a kinda empty track saved by its pretty cool theme. Again, pun not intended. Does Rosalina probably deserve a better track? Does Wave 6 deserve a better track? Probably and probably, but I still would say that I'm fine with Rosalina's Ice World being here, even if I do like looking at it more than actually driving on it. At least it's not 3DS Mario Circuit, am I right fellas?
I regret what I did in the capital of Thailand. Bangkok. Who told you?
Aw man, where'd the orange skybox go? Shame, remember that visual was very striking when I first played this back in Tour. Anyway, Bangkok Rush is, again, one of the better Tour cities. Though that being said, I don't really have much to say about it even then. I just think it's a kinda neat city. If I have one thing to complain about, it'd be the fact that this port kinda feels unfinished. The skybox being different I can chalk up to an artistic difference, but the Tour version had these inky piranha planes that spat ink onto the ground, which was something that we've never seen before in Mario Kart. Now they're just regular piranha planes, which is kinda disappointing. Also, some parts of the track feel super unoptimized for 8 Deluxe. Examples being that the roof of the marketplace is being hard to stay on sometimes, and the canoe sometimes not being responsive to your trick requests. Look Nintendo, I know this track is called Bangkok Rush, but that doesn't mean you have to literally rush this port out. Aside from those elements, this is a pretty good one. While the skybox is a pretty big downgrade from Tours, it still looks decent in its own right, and the cityscape itself does have a nice color scheme too. What really makes this track though are the things you do in it. The river section at the start is memorable, even if the canoes aren't as reliable as I want them to be. And there's also a bunch of sections with multiple levels of elevation using the train tracks. I usually like taking the top pass, but the fact you have a choice here at all is pretty cool. On the second lap there's this glide section that seems as usual at first, but then you find out one day that there's a grass patch over to the right that you can use as a mushroom shortcut. You would think that section would be out of bounds, but it's not, and I think it's very cool that they put that in. And on the last lap, you enter another parking garage that slowly goes up and up until you get sent out into an array of tents. You can either land on solid ground like a total bore, or you can go nuts and bounce on the tents instead. Guess what choice I always make. Also, I have to applaud the amount of areas where you can cut extra close on some corners. Not the hardest thing to do, but it still gives me the feeling of cutting the needle. Not a masterpiece of track design by any means, but in terms of Tour cities, I would 100% choose this over most of the selection available. And if they put more effort into the 8 Deluxe version specifically, mostly in the optimization department, I'd be even more willing to hop on it because the base was already enjoyable enough. Anyway, time to make the obligatory jokes. I've had a complicated relationship with this version of Peach Gardens. Don't get me wrong, OG version of the track, great. Super cool how we're in Peach's front yard. Looks lovely, is fun to drive, and yet still surprisingly complex with how they position you to either go around the flower beds or go through them as an item. And then there's the chaos of the maze-like hedges. Oh, what a fun time. Helped that it was in Mario Kart Wii, because of course it was, so I was able to get very familiar with this course over the years. So when it was announced to be coming back in 8 Deluxe, you can bet I was happy about it. Finally, a classic is coming into the limelight again. Then I played it for the first time and, half the track is missing. Why are the flower beds arranged off the track? What happened to the multitude of variations you would take to go around or through the beds? I'll tell you what happened to them. Tour. Obviously the flower beds in the original track wouldn't have fit well with a game that doesn't let you enter off-road unless you have a mushroom, so they ditched them and just had you turn to the right. And thanks to that, now this console game version has that layout. Man, what a bummer. The hedge hell section, as I officially coined it, also got hit a bit, with most of the hedges removed and the chain shops no longer having items trailing behind them. Also a shame, but at least things were added here to make up for it, as opposed to an entirely bare pass like before. The hedges, while less in numbers, are now modeled after various Mario characters, including a Toadette hedge, which is sure as hell enough to make me forget about what's lost. Now I wish I could have that near my house. I will tell ya, these charming character hedges are way better damage compensation than this giant piranha plant. I know I just praised this plant 3 tracks ago, but I prefer different foliage in different areas, okay? Also, they closed off the roundabout at the start, but I'm fairly certain that the only reason you could do that originally was to be funny, so I'm not that broken up about it. Visuals are also kind of a mixed bag in terms of if it's an upgrade or not. I do like the brightness of it, and I also like the road building with the added benches and tables where people are not eating. That being said, I think I do slightly prefer how the DS and Wii versions look. I think that mostly has to do with the area outside of the yard. Yes, it was literally just a PNG of the top of trees, but I think it made the place feel more populated than the sparse hills in this version. Not saying the hills look bad, they just give a different feeling. I also like the darker skybox and the striped grass near the end of the track. Those were minor things, but I still like them more. To clarify though, this version still looks very good, especially for a BCP track. In the same wave as fucking Rock Mountain, no less. Overall, with the things that were lost, of which were only barely balanced out by things that were added, I was pretty comfortable in calling this version the weakest version of Peach Gardens that has ever existed. And it is. But that being said, holy shit, the final lap takes you backwards? We're using the unused routes in the original Peach Gardens to do so, and there's a brand new glider ramp on the pass, and we can high-five Luigi, and also enter Peach's ass. Oh boy, now I'm awake. The first time I saw this happen, I somehow missed the toes of Tor arrows in the extra section on the map, and I was blown away to the moon and back. Even now, I still think this is truly what still justifies this remake to me, getting to see the course in a brand new angle. Plus, I like how the shortcut at the start now becomes the place where first place needs to prepare himself to make sure he's not overtaken by the Shroom Man with the Shroom Plan. That's really cool and all, but even with this epic twist, I do still prefer the original just because of all 3 laps being consistent, rather than 2 laps of fine but slightly empty feeling Peach Gardens and 1 lap of very cool based Peach Gardens are. As such, I am still a bit disappointed that we didn't get the original flower layout for this one, though they would probably have to adjust it so that the jump here doesn't send you into a flower bed if you aren't ready. But considering that this remake has been growing on me over time even as I write the script, I can't say that this remake is a titanic betrayal on the level of Sky Garden or Koopa Cape. Because again, you can high-five Luigi. Honestly, at this point, why not rename this track Luigi Gardens? Again, he needs a track with his name in it.
Groovy Greeks.
Hey, remember when I used Asin Stash as a fake out for SNES Mario Circuit 3? Boy, that was funny. But not unprovoked. You know that whole story I was yapping on about my stupid, dumb, brainless PP hatred for Koopa Cape? This track is the 8 Deluxe equivalent of that. I used to fucking hate this one. In fact, at one point I literally had it ranked as the 3rd worst track in the game, only above these 2 shits. Yikes. I mean, yeah, my first drive-through with this track went about as crappy as everyone else's first attempt, but once I actually got good, I actually grew to start liking this one. Though I will admit, the reasons I couldn't stand this one at first are the reasons why I'm not rating it too highly now. Said reasons were that the track looked boring and was impossible to drive. For the first one, did I not see most of its contemporaries? Compared to most city tracks blending in with each other, even some of the better ones, Asin Stash stands out by taking place not in a generic city, but instead focusing on the ruins of the O that Greece still have around for some reason. It's definitely a change of scenery, and I applaud it for changing up the formula, especially since these city tracks are meant to be taking us, you know, around the world. That being said, even though this isn't a generic city, so is Mario Circuit 3, so... Okay, I'm exaggerating. This track doesn't look awful. In fact, it looks fine. That being said, I don't really find brown pillars and rocks to be my aesthetic, personally. It's just not really striking for me, especially since there aren't that many things that can distinguish as landmarks on the track, aside from this one statue. Again, that's just aesthetic opinions, and I'm so glad that we have one Tour City track that doesn't just take place in the city, especially when said city looks like this. As for the gameplay, yeah, this track just kinda slapped me in the balls and I got pissed at it. There's one section that I will still concede as being kinda horseshit, and that's this blind jump. And I even got used to that as well. I just think it's bad design to have a track where 95% of the time your player base drives into a wall, not because of lack of skill, but because they were entrusting you to have a straight pass in front of them. Also, the glider section down to the houses doesn't feel that good. Do you want me to touch the ground or not? Aside from that, it's mostly just a skill you need to get used to. I would have liked to be warned about the pillar section before playing it, so I would have known that going on autopilot would result in the place becoming even more of a ruin than it already is. Look, if I defend the trees in Mount Wario, I can't complain about these pillars anymore. Same with the ascending stair section at the end. Once you find out that there's paths here that don't result in you driving into a pillar, it can be quite fun to go up. Also, this rock apparently bounces you off if you drive into it funny. Gee, I sure hope a YouTuber doesn't use that as a reason of why capitalism is still rampant. With all that apologizing aside, this is pretty neat. I like this one split pass at the start, most of the turns feel well optimized. I dig the rock section that reminds me a lot of DK Mountain, and now that I've learned the lines for the stairs, it's a lot more fun to trick up them, and maybe even go to the middle if I have a mushroom or even cooler, a shell. It's not full of content, but I say it does a pretty good job with what it has, especially for a tour city. Definitely did not deserve the slander I initially gave it. This is a good one, though I will penalize it for being the only track in the Federal Cup that's not an S tier. Sad, sad. Again though, glad that this cup houses a decent city compared to a crap one.
Wow, chocolate. Half price.
I'm aware that Choco Mountain is the most infamous Mario Kart 64 stage, but I don't really get the hype. At least before this version. I respect the aesthetic of a mud mountain with a foggy sky, but the gameplay was literally just turn too hard and you'll start spinning. Oh, and also you could fall off the track if you didn't get used to the controls. Mario Kart 64's controls. Thankfully, this remake fixes a lot of the issues the OG had, mostly due to 8 Deluxe having a more refined system that doesn't punish you for turning. Thanks to this, it's now much easier to not fall off and lose 50 spaces by one mistake. Mostly because you literally can't now. I don't see the purpose of fencing off this section. I guess they wanted to make it easier than the original, to which I say that the Serious Evolution has already done that enough. Having the ability to still fall off here would be a lot more justifiable in this version, since this game's refined controls make it so that if you were to fall off, it'd be your own fault. Where in 64 it felt like a punishment for not being able to digest a 50-year-old grapefruit. Having the fence here feels like an overcorrection for something that probably would have been corrected to begin with. Again, glad to have a version that's not overtly punishing, but I feel like this is something that could have been kept in. The rest of the track is pretty fun. I like taking all the turns, and I also like they added a crystal cave. Gives the track a lot more personality. And there's cool mushroom cuts as well. Just a fun, basic track. Pretty fitting for being in the first cup of the first wave, honestly. Oh yeah, in terms of aesthetics, pretty good for a wave 1 track. I mean, the rocks are still bare, but at least the mud has texture and the foggy sky is still there, which I like. Oh yeah, mud. I'm sorry, this mountain is not edible. At all. Not that I eat chocolate anymore, which makes me sad, but the Choco in the name is a big fat lie. This is clearly just mud. It's Dirt and Rocks Mountain. The closest it ever gets to chocolate is imagining the striped walls as a layer cake. I guess I can see that, but the rest of it barely manages to even reach that level. You want to see a land of chocolate? Boom.
Wow, chocolate. Half price.
Oh wait, shit, I already used that as the transition. I mean, Jesus Christ, there's a fish skeleton in the walls. Who eats fish with chocolate? It's like dipping your fried chicken in strawberry jam, it doesn't work. I like driving on this track, I feel the need to say that again for some reason. And from one mountain to another, we have Merry Mountain, a Christmas themed track, which is something I welcome in the series. I mean, I don't get too into Christmas nowadays, mostly due to the fact I discovered that Santa isn't actually Anyway, how does the track handle said theme? Oh my lord, this track is beautiful, and is honestly really close to base 8 quality. Obviously it doesn't reach it, but good lord, look at the town, how many buildings there are, the lighting on them, and then you have a split pass where you have the option to go on a train track where the Magic Christmas train resides. I usually take the train tracks, but the fact there's choice here at all is cool. One thing I like to do at this part is not take the extra ramp, but instead just trick back into the road itself, because that's satisfying. And then as if the theming wasn't great enough, then it starts building up to the mountain itself, and we go higher and higher, and the snow overtakes the view as we build up to the peak of the mountain where we see cable cars coming out of a pile of gifts, and a huge straightaway is what greets us.
You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch.
I mean, at least the view is beautiful. Seriously, what the fuck? This isn't the worst or most painful straightaway in the game, but it's by far the most disappointing. All that build up, all this atmosphere, leads to this. Aside from the gravity boosters, which even then are too spaced out to properly line up if you're not just heading straight down the middle. There's absolutely nothing here. At least add some boost panels, some snowmen, put a rock in the middle so we have some fucking decision to make. Hell, the glider ramp that ends this doesn't even show up until the second lap, because apparently even that was too crazy for the first lap. We can't even have one speck of non-snow beyond this vital stretch of track. What are you, nuts? Do you want to know how high this track would be if this straightaway wasn't here? 12 spots higher. Because the theming is awesome, the escalation is awesome, the music is kind of forgettable but okay, the world building is awesome. Altogether, this could have been an awesome track. Instead, all this is just built up to one of the most boring sections in the game. And hey, I'm glad that the build-up itself is still fun. That's why I still like this track despite everything, but I would have liked it if it was an actual, build-up to something. It's like the anti-gravity section in Sunshine Airport, but at least that has you doing a drift. Again, I do still feel more positive than negative about it at least, even with how underwhelming the design is. Because everything except the ending is great, but the ending itself is too huge of a flaw to ignore completely. Especially when the track is perfectly constructed to build up something that's nothing. Well, I'll take what I can get at the moment. Christmas Town is Christmas Town.
When an E lunges out.
Well, we don't need dolphin shows anymore. Man, that will make some people unhappy. Piranha Plant Cove is a decent romp through underwater ruins, mostly revolving around eels. I will say that it was interesting to see this be the final tour original track in 8 Deluxe, because it's probably the one I have the least to say about. But not in a bad way. It's not amazing, it's not terrible, it's not something that kicks off surprisingly good but deflates in a pretty jarring way, it's just decent. For the final wave, I actually kinda appreciate that, especially since it allows the momentum to build up to the true hard hitters of the final wave in the last cup. As for why this track is pretty good, it's got a pretty cool theme that executes it mostly pretty well. The only real drawback, and maybe my biggest complaint, is that the stage is a bit too bright for what's supposed to be murky underwater ruins, but aside from that, I do think the architecture here is pretty well set up. It truly does feel like we're in an underwater ruin, even if it's somehow daytime during nighttime. Stuff like the shipwreck and the slight PD piranha imagery helps with that. The track design is also pretty good. Similar to the tour cities, it's 3 different laps compared to 3 repetitions of the same lap, which makes it a bit harder to remember everything that happens in it. But there are things in it I do remember. I like the shipwreck shortcut on the 3rd lap, and I also like the verticality of everything. And there's also the split pass on the 2nd lap, which doesn't really do anything gameplay wise, I just like how it looks. My favorite part of the gameplay is something that I don't think was entirely intentional, being that when you hop underwater, physics break down and you can float over the off-road by holding back. This is possible even on 150cc and it's satisfying as hell. Honestly, while I'm fine with the track being 3 different laps since all of them are enjoyable enough, I would have had this track much higher if it was just the first lap 3 times, since that has 2 out of the 3 BUJs, which stands for big underwater jumps, you can make, including the biggest one. These are honestly my main draw from this track, over everything else they probably intended to be the highlights. Not a groundbreaking track by any means, and by tour originals it's not really a standout, but I'm glad that it's here. Certainly is more interesting than Pipeline would have ever been. I mean, it would have been okay compensation for what happened to Koopa Cape, but how can I enjoy this? There's no BUJs. Can you seriously say with a straight face that this is more fun than this? All of you are gonna say yes, aren't you? So, I'm obviously not gonna force you to agree with me since, that'd be kinda dickish. But can we just admit for a second that Calamari Desert as a concept is a complete shitpost? Or at least before this version. I can't believe that the 64 devs got away with not just making a desert track, but a desert oval. At least, an oval that had half of it pulled to the left. If they did nothing with it, it had the risk of being the most boring desert track in the series, which is not a good title to have when you consider the implications of it. So what do they have to make up for the utterly terrible idea? Train. I mean, I'm more of a Metro guy myself. This train is definitely what redeems this track, which is weird because from a design perspective, it actually really doesn't work. Its main purpose is to stop racers that are about to cross the tracks by showing up at the wrong time, which has the chance to group people together if other racers are close behind you. Which sounds interesting, except when you realize that if anyone gets a star or any other item which lets them power through the train, they become able to ignore the hazard and get way further in front of everyone else that needs to wait for it to pass. And that's when the hypothetical person would need to get stopped by the train in the first place. Sometimes the person in first can break away and have the cars lined up in their favor so that they'll never get stopped, where everyone else is unable to catch up thanks to the train stopping them. This hurts especially if you're in second, since it wasn't until 8 where they made it so that items depend on distance rather than position. And even if the gimmick works as intended, is it really that interesting to be doing nothing while waiting for it to pass? I mean, it shouldn't be, but in this environment, I guess I'll take it. Yeah, all those train hijinks I mentioned, as stupid as unfair as they are, were still definitely the most interesting part of the track. When the tracks are coming near, I am hoping that the train is nearby, because I know that even if I'm just stopping for it, it's still certainly going to be a scene whatever happens there. Especially if someone brought items to the waiting party instead of hungry hippos. Especially if that person is me. And who knows, maybe the train will be nice to me and not block me and instead block everyone else. Though that would just force me to just drive around the oval 3 times and not do much else. So maybe I'll take a fair game instead. Yeah, it sounds like a complete mess of a track, but it is a complete mess that I always hope to get a laugh out of. Not sure if it was ironically entertaining enough for me to want it in 8, but hey, I'm always willing for a quick laugh. Oh, they actually made it a real track this time. Neat. Yeah, instead of making you avoid the train like usual, this time they mixed up and decided to incorporate Calamari Desert 2 from Tora in the second lap. And in case you don't know what that entails, that involves you literally driving on the train tracks themselves into the tunnel and out again. And all the while you're going against the train, so that's still a hazard as well. Not only is it rare in general to have a retro track change up the original so much, but I think this change was for the positive. I mean, what would you prefer, going in a loop 3 times and then being stopped by the funny train, or going in a loop once and then having to deal with a brand new situation for the next 2? Speaking of which, I do like how the pacing and routing was handled here, starting with the OG version for the first lap and then making the next 2 laps be Calamari 2. Since Calamari 2 is so much longer that they have to divide it into 2 laps, it really flows well. All this is cool, but I still do have one nitpick about this new version. See, they put in the tour arrows to prevent you from entering the tunnel too early, and they also put them on the second lap to inform you about the new direction you have to go. So why did they feel the need to throw in this random ramp as well? Not only does it look unfitting for the environment, you might as well just throw a neon sign telling people where to go. But I also just think it would have been better to just turn onto the tracks instead of going onto the ramp. Plus, having the tracks still exposed on the turn means that the OG Calamari fans could have the chance to wait for the train once more before they see the new content. At least you can drift on the ramp a bit early and jump onto the track yourself instead of trusting the ramp to put you there instead. That's nice that they let you do that. Oh wait, apparently these ramps have a name, and it's Konami Road. The picture they use on the Mario Wiki sums up the name quite accurately. Speaking of visuals, it obviously doesn't have much to offer since it's just a desert, especially in a BCP, but thankfully it's an orange desert and not a yellow one, you know, the better looking ones. The stuff outside the track should have been what Sunset Wild should have taken inspiration from. A naturally pleasant skybox with hues other than yellow, and red rocks instead of rocks coated in the night after a trip to the Mushroom Cafe. And of course, the train itself still looks cool as well. Calamari Desert still isn't an amazing track, but with the huge changes made to it here, it's definitely going to a track I only ironically enjoyed to a track I unironically enjoy. Now there's actual stuff to do here that's not relying on a gimmick that the community is pretty divided on, and that I view as more of a meme. I think this brand new variant is what this track desperately needed, making it so that a track that's so popular, even as how contentious it is, actually has a version of it that works properly. I know this track is from the Nintendo 64, where technology was limited, so they might not have been able to do this back then, but this version is honestly how Calamari Desert should have been from the beginning. My only real gripe is with the soundtrack, specifically how they handled remixing it. The original track was already not that special to begin with, but I did like the flute that emulated the train whistle. Really helped with the atmosphere, and it was a pretty creative thing to put into a song for a desert track about a train. So what did they do with it in this game? Ow. Well hey, at least now I've talked about every track in 8 Deluxe where I don't like the music. All 7 of them. And the game was 96 tracks, where 95 of them have unique songs. So was Mozart ever really that talented?
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition!
You know, for a genre of Mario Kart tracks that was half consisting of mid, the fact that they're 8 Deluxe showing it on a good note is something to be proud of. And said good note happened to be Madrid Drive, which, not even kidding, was a city I was not aware existed before this track came out. I'm not good at geography. I will admit that the only reason this isn't higher is because there's a lot of areas that are your typical city dead air that I'm all too familiar with. Like, I don't know why the straightaway is here. And some parts of the road do feel like they go on for a bit too long, but what this track has to offer in terms of set pieces is pretty damn sick. Even in the first lap, we have a plaza with a hidden cut to make amongst its tables and a sleeping Wiggler that's on his vacation in Spain. Then afterwards we go through a train station, and then a few seconds later we go through a museum with so many distinct art pieces, one of which has a piranha plant that has come to life unlike his fellow Pranthran around him. Honestly, this section makes me want an entire track based on a museum. Oh, there we go. And then in the second lap, we go from a marketplace to the plaza again, with the Wiggler from before now moving this time, making it an even more interesting obstacle to look out for and drive around. Then you have one of the more memorable city gliders with the water jets, and the grass on the left can again be cut if you use a mushroom before you even hit the ground. And then for the final lap, you end up in the stage's biggest set piece of all, the stadium. I mean, we've seen stadiums in the game before, but this stadium stands out in particular because it actually has some of the equipment you need to play the sport in it, and it's being kicked by shoe Goombas. They're actually playing the game, how quaint. While leaks indicate that this wasn't supposed to be what the cities ended on, the sheer variety in areas available make it a pretty appropriate final, and that's in combination with the fact that it's pretty good. It may be another tour city, but it's one that still remains in my head after the fact, and for good reasons as well. How could I forget that they made entirely new variations of the music for the stadium and museum, even though you spend like 5 seconds in each. Torchitas Churros.
Move to the Netherlands.
And Amsterdam Drift is yet another surprisingly good city track. Admittedly, the set pieces here aren't as imaginative as they were in Madrid, which means I probably won't spend as long talking about this one, but it makes up for that with its interest consistency, which sounds like a tax term now that I'm saying it out loud. While there are a few seconds in Madrid where the straight road curves reared its ugly head, here, there's no section where I feel like I'm heading down the 50th street or that I'm doing fuck all. Even this section, which would otherwise be yet another boring straightaway, is made interesting with the presence of things on the track itself to avoid, including a giant tram. Reminds me a bit of Toad Harbor, which makes me happy. Even aside from that, driving through the city streets actually feels good here just because of the atmosphere and how bright everything is. When you're not in the city, you're gliding through a grass field with moles, and the glide even allows you to glide to the left and take another off-road cut if you have a mushroom. This is becoming a theme. And then you go to an underwater section with the jet streams that you have to be careful around or they're jetting you into the canals instead of on top of them. And then it gets into a giant tulip yard for the last lap, which is simultaneously the best and worst looking part of the track, but what does that matter? Mushroom cut. That's a lot of things, and it all flows together surprisingly nicely. Again, it doesn't really try to aim too high in terms of what it does, but it also doesn't decide, hey, you know what would be interesting right now? Nothing. I wasn't expecting Amsterdam of all cities to be one of the more memorable ones, but hey, this track has a lot more going on than most people give it credit for, and I actually like driving here. If it was a little more memorable, I'd probably bump it up a bit, but considering I don't really have any complaints aside from that, top of B seems like an appropriate place to put this one. And since we're at the top of B, logically that means we have to make our progress by moving to, okay, you get the gist, good stuff gets gooder, yada yada. Okay, I swear, it's not just home country bias that got Sydney Sprint so high. I mean, obviously, I'm in Melbourne, not Sydney. And Sydney isn't even in Australia, it's in Papua New Guinea. I remember back when Wave 2 first came out, and this was the first time that people were really getting into a city track, after these boring shits in this decent start. And I was alongside them. Over the years, after we've gotten more complex and interesting cities, this one has shrunk back in people's opinion, with some saying that it was never anything special to begin with. And I'm not alongside them. I mean, I could bring up what I like about the gameplay, being that the layout is arranged quite well for a city. There are usually some nice turns to take, and they prevent the bridge from being a straightaway by putting in a bunch of ramps you can trick on. For the second and third lap at least, you go the other way on the first where you can't take the ramps, and yeah, there it's a bit annoying. Speaking of laps, not only does everything flow well into each other, but it even starts with a good introductory lap, and then after a long second lap, the third lap is the first lap again, in reverse. Bookends in a Mario Kart track, based entirely around this cedar house. You love to see it. Also, there's a bunch of areas where the off-road is a bunch of grass, everywhere. I think you understand what that means. But the gameplay quality does not compare to the sheer amount of vibes and aesthetic this track has. And how can it give off said vibes? With the amount of track that's completely open air, no more cramped city streets or even a suggestion of one here, most of the world lets you see the Sydney sky above and the sea below, and you even get to drive alongside a theme park with a bunch of rides in it, which technically makes this the most interesting theme park track in the game, what the fuck. This is a Wave 2 track, so the visuals do suffer a bit on the technical side because of that, but the groundwork already done is enough to make this one of the prettiest city tracks in the game, especially when it's combined with the color scheme, and especially when combined with the music, which to be honest is the thing that ties this whole track together. And how could it not? I mean, come on, you have ears. I'm playing the song right now as we speak. Listen to the vocal sample, the saxophone choir, the saxophone solo, the pan flute that's very reminiscent of Down Under, which obviously makes sense. Not only does it have all these elements, but it uses all of them to kick some ass. Even in the Mario Kart game was the best soundtrack, this is still 100% some of the best that this game has to offer. If this song isn't in the next Smash, I will buy it. Oh, and then just in case I need to clarify, yes, the jazzy music fits with the lively free atmosphere. That should be obvious, but just in case. Sydney Sprint managed to stand above many of its city contemporaries by 1, being the only city that's from Oceania, and 2, it's fun, lively, and it has a banger soundtrack accompanying you along the way. While other people have shrunk on this track over time, though they're still guessing up the music because, you know, they have souls, I myself am still a fan of this one, just because of the sheer positivity radiating from it. There's obviously one city track better than this one, but amongst the ones that are grouped together, this one's definitely a standout even then. Or yeah, in case you didn't notice, even despite the fact that we're in a new tier, I still talked about most of the city tracks in close range of each other, this time being the third out of 3 solid cities ranked together. There's a reason for that. And while I'm on one, despite this track being very good in A tier, it would still just barely be in the bottom half of the list if I were to combine it with my base game ranking. I have over 250 hours in this game for a reason.
A man has fallen into the river.
I'm gonna try to get through these next 2 segments quickly since they're both up here for pretty easy to explain and similar reasons. Also to attempt the speed up production of this video. Riverside Park is a great example of a GBA track and a BCP changing for the better. And honestly, I'm glad they went up instead of down, because the original Riverside Park, while having a pretty nice background and aesthetic, was still held back by being a 2D Mushroom Cup course. I mean, it was fine enough, it just wasn't very interesting in terms of layout. And it's still pretty simple here. A small part of me wishes that they extended it a bit for this remake, but it makes up for that by having things happen on this simple layout. Now we have the unique element of patooies, which blow items that you can steal if you hit them with an item. And the bridges are now cut up so you can trick off one onto another lower one. Then after a cut you can make with a mushroom, the final turn, which was just a circle originally, now has you enter a cave and you go up and up as you turn and avoid the patooies, and then you jump out in a waterfall. Now that's what I call things happening. I praised the visuals of the OG track, so thank God they kept those intact. The sky looks just as good as ever, and while it's kinda odd that the jungle uses the cartoony trees in what is otherwise a pretty realistic setting, which is the only real giveaway that this is a BCP track and not a base game track, they still look really good. And look, the rocks in the cave are not only actually textured, but they're gray. Certain other stages could learn from that. It's short, simple, but surprisingly sweet. So I like racing on it, and I'm glad they picked this out of all the GBA tracks on tour. It's one that definitely deserves a spotlight put onto it, especially compared to other GBA remakes from that game that completely missed the point.
I poisoned the water supply.
Boo Lake is pretty much in the exact same boat that Riverside Park is in, except this track is a little bit better and the original version was way worse. The common complaint was where's the lake, but a much more prevalent issue that I had was where's the interest. Now look, we have the lake and we have the interest. Yeah, now this track actually takes place over water. It was literally the one thing they needed to do on the GBA, and they didn't do it then, so they had to do it now. Funny. But making the name actually make sense wasn't enough for this track to be considered good, so they decided to make the track design itself more fun by adding elevation to it, so now it gives the feeling of actual progression. And you know that one shortcut the original track had, which was basically its only saving grace? Forget that, here's a much cooler one you can take once you enter the water, that's also dynamic, and has several bush cutouts on it so you can exploit it. So the atmosphere is better thanks to the improved visuals and presence of the lake, plus the surprisingly really good remix of a song that was previously close to Ghost Valley tier. And the gameplay is still on the shorter side, but it's still surprisingly fun to go through. Again, do you see why these two were grouped together? Hell, I even thought about combining their segments entirely, but I decided it would probably annoy fans of both to not give them full segments. If we're comparing the two right now though, while I wouldn't say that the visuals are as stunning as in Riverside, mostly because I'm not sure if Ghost Boardwalk would ever be able to beat out Sunset Jungle, the gameplay here just barely beats out that one in terms of fun, mostly due to that one sick ass shortcut. Anyway, yeah, two GBA tracks that were previously on the midder side, now getting their best form with these reimaginings. They're the complete opposite of what happened to Sky Garden. Even if I don't have much to say about them, the fact is that they're both fun short stages that I have plenty of fun on thanks to their layout. And coincidentally, they're both from the same game. And from two quick segments that I don't have much to say about, to the most dangerous part of any Mario Kart ranking. Would you look at that? I don't have Waluigi Pingus at number 1. I don't have it in the top 10. I don't even have it in S tier. Yes, this is truly such a brave and different stance that nobody has ever had before. Ever. For a track that's become so infamous and popular over the years, Waluigi Pinball has slowly become probably the most controversial Mario Kart track of all time. At least in terms of extremes. If you've been living under a rock for the past 10 years, here's what Waluigi Pinball discussion on the internet boils down to. There's one camp of people that treat this track like the second coming of Christ, the best track in the whole series, and recently, another camp of people have sprung up to say that this track is just a pile of overrated midness and does not deserve the title that this track has been crowned constantly for centuries. The first camp of people think that the second camp are just trying to be different. The second camp of people think that the first camp are sheeple. To put it bluntly, both sides never shut the fuck up. And yet, despite me being aware of the war around this track, here I am, putting it in possibly the worst spot I could have put it. Not high enough to please the first camp, still giving it a positive rating which will upset the second camp. Now this placement will relate to no one, and I will get double the hate. What fun. Look, I know that this video probably won't be seen by a large audience, so the chance of me getting unintelligible venom-filled spew from either side will be lower than most people posting their PCP rankings onto YouTube. But I'll just say this to get it out of the way. Whether you love this track or hate this track, don't have a fit over my placement of it. This track is no different than any other track in terms of how you should be treating it. If you're gonna have a meltdown over this decision, I don't want to hear it. And in the rare case that this is actually close to your own opinion on this track, well, I just waffled on for no reason, haven't I? And maybe I waffled on for too long, because now that's gonna stack up against my time actually talking about Waluigi Pinball, which is already gonna be long. Looking at the track, I can kinda see why it's gained such a controversial status, because to me, Waluigi Pinball is a track that isn't very well thought out, yet somehow it still works really well. I'm sure you've heard everyone's main complaint with Waluigi Pinball, being that there's absolutely no shortcuts or off-road throughout the entire track, since you're spending the majority of a race on this long pinball chute. That's not my problem. There's plenty of tracks I love with none or not too many big shortcuts in them. No, where my issue stems from is that the long road is missing really any big set piece on it. There's this turn at the start where you have the option of drifting inside or taking the boost panels to get some coins. I do like that part, but aside from that, yeah, it's just road. Clearly, this is an unforgivable sin, and drags this course down by a metric ton. Oh wait, what's that? Sweet Sweet Canyon? Neo Bowser City? Mario Circuit GBA? Looks like a good amount of my A tiers fit the description of entirely road course with great theme. Well, aside from that last one. I guess this track is still pretty good after all. You know, despite there definitely being the fact that more could have been done with the track design, the reason that Waluigi Pinball still works is because of two things. First off, while there isn't a solitary set piece on the chute itself, there's a moving one. Yes, natural for a pinball machine. The pinballs themselves are entering the chute and are attempting to flatten you. Since they provide interesting gameplay of attempting to avoid them when you get close, and in fact are pretty much the only variation you can get on this part, I think they're a welcome addition to this track. It certainly helps that they usually give you space to drive around. The only real issue I have with them is that they have the tendency to literally drop right on top of you when they're coming out of their chute, which is a bit annoying, but since they all drop into the track at the same places, you can plan your route to avoid that happening. Also, the lack of a bottom screen from the DS and 3DS means that it's harder to know if one's right behind you, but you can just press a button and manually do that yourself. Aside from that, the reason that this track doesn't feel boring to me, despite literally just being a road, is because of the open airness of the chute itself. So you get to see everything else on the track ahead of you while you're on these roads. Yeah, you don't spend most of the track on the pinball table, but you still spend a good amount of the track with the pinball table in view, either directly in your line of sight or below the path you drive on. As such, the best part of this track, the aesthetic, is not lost despite spending so much time where you'd think that it wouldn't show up. As for the pinball table itself, it should be the piece that undoes the whole thing, since I mean, it's a straightaway. Isn't that something people also complain about? Especially me? Oh wait, the straightaway actually has bumpers and pinballs to avoid, so you aren't just driving in a straight line for the last section of the course. Gee, if only another purple track that builds up to a straightaway could have done the same thing. Anyway, enough this should be bad but it's actually good talk. Time to talk about the undisputed best part of the track. The visuals. I've constantly jabbed at the BCP visuals for not portraying the tracks in them in the greatest light they could be in, but Waluigi Pinball honestly works really well with store BCP visuals, mostly because entirely flat textures actually make sense here. The bright visuals really make the place pop off, especially when it comes to the neon everywhere. The tube at the start with the flowing lights that feels like no other glider section in the game. The sign at the start with Waluigi's face on it is a big step up from just having the logo before. The neon signs directing you where to go, one sign saying pinball, and another sign saying Waluigi. Also mini paratroopers everywhere, which must be a sign that this pinball table hasn't been disinfected throughout the whole day. And of course, the table itself. Bright visuals and a reflective metal of the table reflecting the lights above. I love that the slot machine was kept to truly keep up the theme of lottery and arcade. And the Waluigi statue being replaced with a Waluigi cutout is a bit of an interesting choice, but the tilting head honestly adds a lot of personality to it. It perfectly reflects the hectic nature of the table itself. I wonder why they replaced the statue though. Knowing certain people on the internet, maybe somebody did something with it. Either a Waluigi hater or a Waluigi lover. Take your pick. While the BCP honestly did a better job than expected with this track, and it's probably the best that this track has ever looked, that does bring up one of my gripes with how they handled this track in this game. Mostly that it really should have been in the base game and given the base game treatment. I like the Wario Stadium remake, but I feel like that track should have been in 7, while Pinball should have been in 8. Because this track was a base 8 reimagining, akin to the one that TikTok Clock got, could have popped the fuck off. While the graphical upgrade would have been one thing, they could have entirely changed the vibe of it. Instead of having the pinball machine be in space, it's instead taking place in an arcade, akin to Ribbon Road 2. Like, the concept of a casino track is already cool enough, so having one of the most popular Mario Kart tracks at that time be given that vibe would have been godlike. And it could have experimented with the chute itself by making it anti-gravity, since it's not really connected to anything, though that would bring up the question of how the pinballs would behave if they were upside down. Also, Waluigi Pinball replacing Wario Stadium would mean that we would finally be rid of the annoyance of 2 tracks being the only ones to share music. I get it, the music still fits with the track, but just the fact that 1 out of the 96 tracks in this game share music with another is so annoying, especially after 8 years of a Mario Kart game where every track finally had its own unique music. Honestly, I would have preferred it if 2 other tracks in this game shared music with each other, because there, the problem would be less easily solvable. Now, the obvious solution would be to silently replace Wario Stadium with Airship Fortress. Oh, and I guess I'm also legally required to bring up the missing gutterball sound effect that they put in the intro instead for some reason. While thinking about how to write this segment, I was gonna be edgy and say that, yes, a missing MP3 file totally affects my opinion on this stage. But then Pinball popped up in torrent and had the sound effect and I realized, Oh wait, that was a really cool detail, now I miss it. At least the item box sound effect is still here, thank god. I think this is currently the longest I've talked about a track. Looking at Audacity now, I'm already over 13 minutes, Jesus. But can you blame me? This is the track in A position, and I have thoughts on it similar to both sides of the debate, those who love it and those who don't. No matter what side you're on, you just need to know that this is a mid-A tier track in my ranking. If every track outside of the top 10 was a bad track, this would be a very hard video to watch. This applies to both sides of the debate, for the record. There shouldn't be controversy over me putting a fun, really good looking, and memorable track in a spot where I think it fits. But you all had expectations of where everyone else should be putting this track, when in reality, it's just a good track like any other. And even if bringing this track back into A Deluxe means that the war will end up continuing for years, the bright side of being able to play one of the most memorable DS tracks in this game is worse the community continuing to tear itself apart. And now, back to segments that don't take a millennia to finish.
Finally. Some good fucking
I guess it shouldn't be shocking that Singapore Speedway is the best city track in the game by a significant margin. After all, it's the only city track to not actually be based on a city, but an entire country instead. That alone should be an obvious sign on how this one compares to the rest of them, but there's more. Pretty much every other city track in the game, even the ones I like, feels like we're just in a city. We all just came to the city, we're driving in the streets, and life is going on as normal. With Singapore, that's not the case. This city is fully aware that we're here, and they're throwing a party for us. Look at the time, the bright night sky was the moonlight somehow still illuminating the clouds above. And look at how the city buildings are lighted up to help with the atmosphere. Not only that, but the crowds, the scenery, the water jets, the glider section in particular are the biggest confirmation that Singapore actually cares about us being here, and they're giving us all that they have. This ties into the fact that the best city track, of course, has the best song given to a city track. The slow build up to a synth-filled paradise was a perfect loop built around a simple piano melody. Not only is it an incredible song on its own, but it also perfectly fits with the track's visuals. This is, a party. And it still has an exotic vibe to it to fit the new location we're in, especially when it comes to the Chinatown variant. Now recently, I've heard some members of the community say that this city is apparently of her 8 tits. Mostly boiling down to the first 2 laps basically consisting of nothing on the track itself. I see that, but honestly in this environment, I don't really care. The semi-straightaway that the track starts with, which would be annoying in most other cities, is made up for with the fact that it occurs as the music is building up, so there's still some sort of progression as you make your way down the pass. Admittedly, the fact you drive through it on the second lap again doesn't seem the most appropriate, but even then I don't mind. You've got a good track and atmosphere when driving straight is still fun. And while the pool and Chinese segments don't have much in terms of hazards that you can't instantly murder with a mushroom, the set pieces themselves are varied and unique enough to make up for that. It's not just a road, but a road with fashion. And they're sandwiched between some scenic and interactive as hell glider sections, like the one where you fly through rings to go over a football stadium, and the aforementioned glider into the third lap, with the geysers that Singapore themselves activate for us. And then once we get into the third lap, things truly kick into high gear, which I guess is fitting with the title of Speedway. First we have a conveyor belt section, which speeds up the pace of the race even faster than before, just like in Big Blue and Toad's Factory. And then afterwards we get sent into a similar section, except instead of conveyors, we have a light wireframe thing on top of us. Alongside those towers that are nearby, it truly makes it feel like a Singapore moment. Is the joke of never calling anything in the city track by its name not funny anymore? Please tell me. Then that takes us to possibly one of the best glider sections in the game. You take off and then boom, choices abound. You can go instantly down, trick off this octopus structure thing either towards the top of the overhang with a speed boost, or to the ground with the turns and a faster way to get to the end of the section. But of course you can still take the scenic pass and keep gliding towards the boost rings to go through them to keep up your glide. So many options available and they're all fun as hell. And the rest of the track still keeps up the pace down to the very last turn. Oh, what an experience. For a genre of tracks that ended up blending too close together at the end, the fact that this specific one managed to hit this high and be so popular for a good reason is both truly commendable and also kinda annoying. Like, if you could make city tracks this kick-ass, why did you make half of them debug levels with regional shit slapped onto it? London, Tokyo, and Los Angeles are all empty and dead inside, even though you clearly had the potential to go higher. Honestly, on the topic, the only reason this cool-ass track isn't even higher is just because of the presence of so many other city tracks with the same nighttime aesthetic. Of course, this one completely stomps all of them, well, except for one, but Singapore would truly stand out way more if it wasn't in a genre that was so oversaturated, which was the problem I was talking about when I was introducing the tour cities. I did not intend content that bookended it all. Whatever. I'm glad that we got any truly great cities in this pass at all. And the fact it's been able to get so high despite 13 other tracks just like it, maybe even more if you count every other non-tour city track in this game, is not an easy task to do. If it wasn't for several of the original tracks, which are obviously way higher up than in this one, this would truly be Tour's magnum opus, at least when converted to a Deluxe. You know, for such a basic ass opinion as Singapore is the best city, I had a lot to say about it. I'm gonna be entirely honest, I don't get the complaints about Mushroom Gorge visuals in this pass. I mean, yeah, it's old BCP styled, so not many textures, and it's obviously inferior to the original on the 2008 era Wii, but damn, the color scheme is so popping. I really like the bright green in combination with the bright color of the pass. The bright blue sky with the SMB hills in the background. Can't believe I'm complimenting those for once. And look, the rocks here are actually gray. Again, I don't know why that was such a hard thing for you two to do. Oh yeah, Cave itself looks amazing too, but everyone actually likes that part, so why bother bringing that up? Anyway, yeah, Mushroom Gorge, Mario Kart Wii classic. Everyone and their mother has heard of this one. You bounce on mushrooms, bounce on more mushrooms, then find the mother of all mushroom caves and go fucking nuts. For what was originally a Mushroom Cup track, it has a gimmick that's creative, memorable, and fun as hell to play. Probably my favorite Mushroom Cup course in the series, which, to be honest, I should have seen coming. On the topic of mushrooms, I will have to obviously bring up that this version isn't as good as the original Wii version, mostly due to the aforementioned. Don't get me wrong, the mushrooms here still look cool and feel fun to bounce on, but the ones in Wii look so much more succulent and bouncy. And they kept you in the air for so long and you got sent so high, though honestly that might have just been a result in how tricks themselves were changed compared to the course itself. I don't really care that much though, since the gap between the versions are pretty insignificant. Present, but insignificant. And driving this version still produces the same amount of entertainment as before. I certainly like it more than the 7 version, and I know that because this version contains the blue glider mushroom that version added, while still having every other mushroom they sold to afford it. Basically the 7 version, but with more mushrooms. What's not to love? I'd also praise the gap jump still being here, but I don't know how to get it consistently. It's exhilarating as fuck when I actually get it, but I still need to be taught. Also, you can apparently get this mushroom without a mushroom. So now my placements on this track are gonna get even worse than before. So I'd ask why it took until Wave 4 to finally get a Double Dash track in the Booster Course Pass, especially since the representation of that game in the base 48 was pretty piss poor. But the irony is that despite only getting 3 tracks in the BCP, all 3 of them are actually really good, all way better than the aforementioned base game representation. In fact, across the entire BCP, Double Dash was actually the game that had the best luck when it came to the tracks added. I guess that's what happens when you only have 3 shots and somehow the dice rolled away from Mario Circuit all 3 times. Except Mario Circuit wasn't in Tour, so we had nothing to worry about. Now, if only we got any track that hadn't been remade in a game other than Double Dash, aka 25% of the track list. Okay, anyway, back to the BCP selection, the weakest of the 3 would be Waluigi Stadium, which is saying something because not only is Waluigi Stadium a damn good stage, but it's the best version of a damn good stage. I mean, from the aesthetics alone, it's already a clear upgrade. The original had a cool idea was to complete an utter brownness combined with a sunset sky, but forget that noise. The stadium's so purple and bright now. You know, like a true Waluigi. Don't get me wrong, the Waluigi Kart signs were very funny and iconic, but like, now it's less like we're in a stadium owned by Waluigi, and more like Waluigi has transformed into a stadium and we're riding in him. Wait, what did I just say? Not only that, but the mud is some of the best looking textures in the entire BCP. Actual base game quality there. Helps that the one thing they always put effort into this pass is the floor texture, and here, the floor makes up most of the track. I mean, this is a dirt bike stadium. The wall was just a floor you can't stand up straight on. The hectic moment-to-moment gameplay of performing tricks, taking sharp turns, avoiding fireballs, sometimes doing all 3 at once, all that still remains. They even bring back the mass mud shortcut to make it harder with the addition of tires. The only thing that was lost in translation were these piranha plant cutouts being moved away from the track, which meant that now the pipe itself is more hazardous than the plant. A bit odd, but to be fair, the plants were only really an issue in the original Double Dash version. Ever since the Wii version added half pipes, there wasn't really a point to going on the main pass since you could just take the left half pipe to go around them. And I think they were aware of that, because now taking the half pipe gives you the ability to go on these newly added upper sections. Hell, they even kept a single plant the way that it was, to make sure that you really have to dedicate yourself if you want to go on them. Man, these are really cool. Sure, they're slower than the main pass for some reason, which is weird because you have to go out of your way to go to them, but in a similar fashion to Yoshi Valley, I'm willing to look past that, because taking these alternate paths are way more exhilarating than they have any right to be. The hype you receive, being able to go from pass to pass, it's just so dynamic and creative. So that's epic, and with the rest of the track still being just as fun as always, I consider this version of Waluigi Stadium to be a definitive improvement over what came before it. This track was one of the most well received in not just the wave, but the entire Booster Course Pass, and I can perfectly understand why. It's a good track getting a kick-ass remake, and I'm very happy we got it. Especially since the boost that this remake provided means that it surpassed Waluigi Pinball to be the best Waluigi track in the series. Out of 2. We need more than 2. So since I hadn't played Super Circuit when Wave 2 was announced, my only prior knowledge of Snowland was it being that one blue Super Circuit track that Nathaniel Bandy hated because of the shaking camera. I'm fairly certain the legacy it left behind would condemn it to never show up in the series again. Boy, was I wrong. And just like the 2 GBA tracks I mentioned earlier, this is an upgrade in the positive direction. No longer is everything just a flat expanse of blue, now we have the elevation of this icy road taking us through a fun romp through this winter wonderland. We go around through the trees, head down to the icy lake below, avoid the penguins, and then go back up again on the icy bridge. It's not the most detailed ice course in the world, but compared to what the original was, it might as well be. Aside from this one shortcut getting taken out, the layout is pretty much close to identical to the original GBA version, except now it feels even better due to the elevation in the pass and the slightly less slippery controls. It's fun, and it's also the closest we'll ever get to Sky Garden's original layout in this game, which should not be the case honestly. Graphically, the stage looks pretty nice as well. I like how the background of the original was expanded upon with the crystals being on the off-road that you can drive up to and observe. Mainly, if it just had all this, Snowland probably would have just slotted itself amongst Riverside Park and Blue Lake and not be the highest BCP track in A tier. But there's one crucial detail of this track that I have neglected to mention: the shortcuts. See, this track houses many of them, fitting of its GBA origins. There's this ramp that leads onto the bridge that lets you get on it slightly faster. There's also this off-road cut that's identical to the one in SNES Mario Circuit 3 and Donut Plains 3. Okay, did I say shortcuts? I misspoke. I meant shortcut, meaning one singular shortcut is what pushed this track so high. And it's this one. Glorious. Anyway, Snowland is 7 spots lower if I don't get the ability to take this cut on any of the 3 laps, but when I do take it, it's the best track in the game, so I'll just split the difference and move on. Well, move on a bit, but first I would like to point out that this is the highest track in Wave 2. Well, I mean, as I stated, if I don't get to take the cut, then it's Mushroom Gorge instead, but still, that means Wave 2 is the only wave in the Booster Course Pass that does not have a track I consider to be S tier. I'm not saying it's bad, I like more than half the tracks in it, but considering that fact, and also the fact that it houses my least favorite track in the game, oof. I know Wave 1 is probably objectively the worst wave, but at least that one has many tracks I love in it. So since we're on that topic, let's spend the rest of this video talking about tracks I love. Somehow, lazy old Nintendo decided to port over 13 entire tracks that are genuine cardinal bangers. Yeah, Nintendo accidentally making really great stuff while partaking in soulless banking decisions. Never heard that one before.
Wanna see me run to that mountain and back?
So you know I've mentioned a lot so far that a bunch of the tracks in this pass are currently in their least best version? If you thought that S tier would be the point where you can leave all that noise behind, you have another thing coming. Which sounds weird. Wouldn't the fact that those tracks aren't in their best state disqualify them from being in the highest, well technically second highest tier there is? Hypothetically, but like, if the downgrades from the original aren't bigger than say a bread box, then that won't change the fact that an awesome track is now present in 8 Deluxe, just not as awesome as it was in his home game. I'm an easy to please guy, so my standards for what constitutes a Mario Kart track as still being awesome are a lot lower than other people. I think no track exemplifies that fact more than this game's version of DK Mountain. Because I'm gonna open it right from the rib, this is the worst version of the track. Well, I'm gonna keep referring to it as such, but do know that every time I call it the worst version, I am not including the Tour version in that grouping because Jesus Christ, this track does not work for a point-based combo Mario Kart game where you move at the speed of a lawnmower. As for why the other versions of this track are better, well, I think the footage says enough. DK Mountain is a stage that benefits greatly from any whack physics the game it's appearing in has. So when its debut game is Double Dash, Yeah, it's obvious that things are gonna get real crazy. And honestly, it didn't feel like an actual racetrack. It just felt like we were sent into a large bumpy plane, we bounce around, and we just hope that we don't run into a wall or any other racers. And then you have the volcano spouting rocks onto the chaos zone, and afterwards there's a bunch of consecutive hairpins, which fits really well for the drifting mechanics. It's a perfect fit for this game. And even in Wii, where the track was pretty much entirely identical aside for some extra ramps, that game still has pretty wacky physics and controls when you get down to it. So the charm of barely being able to stay on the track was not lost in translation. Unfortunately, we've now reached perfection in terms of physics and controls, which is usually a good thing since I like it when my games function. But when it comes to something like DK Mountain that thrived off of imperfection and lunacy, it obviously wasn't going to be fully translated 100% intact. Double Dash literally had a chunk of the pass missing. Here I'm pretty sure I could play the whole track while looking at something on my laptop and I would still not fall off once. Damn, sounds like they completely missed the point of this track. Clearly this is destined for the Bowels of C tier now, right? I don't know, man, we're still racing down a mountain. Kinda hard to screw that up. Yes, it's nowhere near as chaotic, but I think they actually kinda planned ahead for that. Because with this remake, it feels like they were going for an entirely new direction. With how wide the road is, and with the addition of making the ramps cover the whole track, it feels like they were trying to turn what was once just an entirely different genre of video game into an actual racetrack. And honestly, I think they succeeded. Trying to find the most efficient way to make the first turn after the cannon, tricking off the stone ramps, taking the turns in the ravine section shouldn't still be fun since the difficulty and risk factor is way lower. But the way all the hairpins join together just make it feel so satisfying to drive down. Then there's the bridge, which they realized that the less crazy physics will make the bridge tilt less interesting, so now it's just constantly waving back and forth. This is the one part of the track I think is even more chaotic than the original, because now you're unable to just stay on it properly when coming to a stop thanks to an item. And even better, you can get around 2 to 4 tricks on it by shaking your controller. You couldn't do that on the original bridge, so I think this is a huge upgrade. Now I wonder how hellish the Double Dash version would be if it had this bridge. On the topic of which, while the chaos is obviously several layers below Double Dash and Wii, it still has imperfection here and there. With the height you can receive by taking the first turn completely wrong, there's half pipes which, as you know, don't really work 100% correctly in this game. And on top of that, they still included the gap cut. I mean, they tried to hide it by putting a fence there, but you can still take it even without a shroom. In fact, it's a little bit more exciting to make it here since you really need to make sure you don't hit the fence and fall into the pit between. Honestly, it's so easy and satisfying that I wonder what's the point of having the hairpin in the first place. Oh, and if you want more cuts where that came from, they let you go on this rock for a short bit if you go off this ramp. So now there's actually more of an incentive to go over here aside from it just being where you're directed to amongst the peril. This rock formation was already in Tor's model, so thank God in their quick porting job that they realized this would be a kick-ass shortcut location. And speaking of the model, man does this mountain look good. First off, the ramps have gone from some random wooden ones in Wii to being actually integrated into the rock formation. Also said rocks are gray. Again, this shouldn't be something worth praising, but some tracks in this path. And I also dig the color of the greenery and the DK barrels from DK Jungle scattered around the track. And this is in combination with the fact that the base for these visual upgrades was a huge ass mountain and the sights below it. There's a reason why this glider shot is so stunning. It displays the angry mountain in all its glory. While the sands of time has assured that DK Mountain is no longer in its most optimal state, the fact that my least favorite version of this track still gives such fun, satisfying, and adrenaline fueled races, and it also has many things that can stand up and give it plaudits for, shows how legendary DK Mountain is as a concept, and how no matter what, it'll be a great time, again not including you. It's lucky that it put in the work to still remain on top in an environment where it doesn't 100% fit. Though while I have been able to obviously look past that, as you can see by how much positive I have to say about this version, there's still a tiny part of me that wishes they put in Dino Jungle instead, even though I think that track's way inferior to Mountain, just so that Mountain can be free for Mario Kart 9 or X instead, where they can really give it a makeover. But like, who knows when 8 Deluxe will finally be replaced? And I'm impatient, so I'll just take DK Mountain being here now over the best version of DK Mountain that has ever existed, but later. And anyway, who's to say that it would even make the next game if it didn't get added here? Knowing Nintendo's relationship with Double Dash, they'd probably bring back Dry Desert again for the second time and literally just turn it into a single pile of sand.
You can stop at 5 or 6 stores or just one.
So was that last section fun to sit through? Well, it better have been, because now it's time to do pretty much the exact same thing again, but with an urban area and even stronger feelings. Yep, that's right. Coconut Mall, baby! I do have to admit, it took a lot longer to realize that this version was actually still S tier compared to DK Mountain. Which doesn't sound that crazy since Coconut Mall has been in 8 Deluxe for 2 years while DK Mountain has only been in for around half. But like, this really needed time to go back on me. because while I think this track is better than DK Mountain, the nerfs it received were much more massive. I'm kinda sad that I eventually have to talk about those nerfs at one point, because if I was just talking about this track in a vacuum, it would be receiving nothing but praise left and right. I mean, come on, it's a shopping mall as a racetrack. The creativity is off the charts. Go into the mall, go on the escalators, trick over the fountains, drive past the stores, be immersed in the atmosphere, move between floors, go higher and higher in the mall until you're eventually forced to jump back onto solid ground with a split pass. Go through the parking lot, re-enter the mall, do the whole thing over again. It's a great theme, and oh boy does it do a lot with it. And it drives so well as well. The turns and trick opportunities present at every corner, the ability to make your own decisions on what route to take. The only thing missing here is having the ability to drive through a shop. Is what I would say if they didn't let you do that as a mushroom cut. Which makes sense, no window shopping allowed. If you want to enter this store, you have to pay with your item. Also, if you still have more mushrooms afterwards, you can avoid the ground floor entirely and head straight to the next section. I don't know why you would do that since it's more fun to go onto the ground floor, but you can. And it's all punctuated with one of the most iconic songs in Mario Kart. Specifically a remix which certainly isn't missing any instruments in the last 10 seconds. All this sounds great, and don't get me wrong, it is great. It's one of the most fun tracks in the game, even if that category is very huge. Coconut Mall in 8 Deluxe is a damn creative romp through a shopping center that's unlike most other tracks you can play in this game. But here's the thing, this track didn't originate in this game, it originated in Mario Kart Wii. There, all the positive and creative elements I listed before are present, but the atmosphere of the track itself was in overtime. For a track running on a 7th gen game with a kinda low poly count, the mall itself was shockingly convincing. The texture work of the ground and the shops that are obscured by windows, the supreme lighting, the imagery of all the Miis, the big coconut mall sphere, the have a nice day sign. It was one of the most aesthetically pleasing tracks in the whole game, and a game that already pushed the admittedly kinda limited power of its home planet a lot. So, was the stage where the aesthetic was one of the best parts of the track? How do you think they handled the port of this track in the first wave of a DLC where mass controversy surrounded the fact that the tracks weren't that good graphically as in base 8? Well, the only aesthetic upgrade this version has compared to the others is that the hallways are no longer these weird metal ramps, and instead they're actually real hallways, complete with a recreation of Mario 1 graphics on the wall. Now, this part feels like it would actually fit in a real life mall, and honestly makes me question what the points of the original metal ramps even were. Aside from that, Again, in a vacuum, the mall architecture is still there, and it still feels like we're driving through one, which is awesome. But like, can you tell this is a Wave 1 track? There's pretty much close to no detail on most of the track. The floor is entirely orange, the foliage looks cheap, and the shops at least still have funny signs on them, but now the windows are just entirely black squares instead of a texture that at least suggests something is inside it. When playing the track, it feels like a mall, but when looking at pictures or even just footage, it just looks like a diorama of a mall. And that's with what they remembered to include. The big famous coconut mall globe is gone, though admittedly 7 got rid of that first, so I'm not going to pin this version for removing that specifically. But what they did get rid of specifically was the have a nice day sign outside. And by this version, I mean Tor's version. I don't think the people in charge of porting this track knew that people cared about this track. That's all I'm saying. Alright, so aesthetically, it's a downgrade. But what does that matter? I already said that this track still gives off the vibes that the original had, so surely a downgrade that I've already come to accept from this past shouldn't matter. This is the S tier, we're meant to be happy, damn it. And yeah, you're right, but there's 2 changes in this version in terms of gameplay that, while not ruining the experience, absolutely puzzle my mind on why they were done. Gee, I wonder if the things I have issue with have been talked about before. So the escalators are just conveyor belts now, with the directions they're going being the most telegraphed thing in the world. I actually wouldn't have a problem with that, since while the rush of trying to find the right escalator was fun, I definitely understood that it was very brutal for a Flower Cup track. I know that there was this funny little pianta that pointed to the right escalator, but by the time he's in view, you'd already be drifting towards the escalator you want. So I can understand wanting to make it easier to tell which escalator is which is what 7 did by putting faint arrows on the escalators. It makes it easier to tell which escalator is the right one, but it does so in a way where you still have to pay close attention to what you're doing. Here, the arrows are so bright, you can see them from a mile away, so any skill involved in figuring them out ahead of time is non-existent now. I get that from a conceptual standpoint, reusing these assets made sense, but you really needed to think about how they would behave from a gameplay perspective. And on the topic of making this track easier, what the hell happened to the parking lot? Look, I'm fine with the cars no longer being driven by Miis and instead being driven by Shy Guys. Shy Guys are just as good, if not better, than Miis. I'm also fine with the fact that there's only 2 compared to 3, it just means that there's a free spot where I can park my cart. No, the issue here, and that should be obvious, is that instead of driving back and forth over the boost panels and being a varied obstacle obstacle that you have to plan around. Now they just stand still and occasionally do donuts. The entire game plan now is just to go left to avoid the first car, and then go right to avoid the second car. That, or tilt yourself by a slight bit to just drive straight to avoid them both. In a similar fashion to the removed hedge squares in Peach Gardens, this is just insulting. All the moment-to-moment thought process in this section is gone now. It's like they don't even have a parking lot section at all. You could replace these cars with walls, and the gameplay would be pretty much identical. And I know that because these cars were walls when Wave 1 first got released. Yep, they straight up released this track in an unfinished state. I'm glad that they actually decided to finish it later, but the fact that I'm even applauding them for finishing their work after they go live is fucking stupid. That, or they actually had the cars working in time for Wave 1, realized how inferior they were to every other version, and then had the big brain manipulation technique of intentionally kneecapping them at release, so that when they fixed them for Wave 2, people would be congratulating them no matter what. Actually, nah, that's probably not what happened. Nintendo's too stupid to come up with a plan like that. Anyway, this change is what cements this version as my least favorite. And unlike DK Mountain, this includes the tour version, because the cars in that version actually work like the original cars. And they still have the Shy Guys in them. And that version has less saturated visuals. The mobile phone version of Coconut Mall is better than the one in the 6th best-selling game of all time. Jesus. And yet despite everything, it's still Coconut Mall. I've been bitching a lot about the problematic changes done in this version, not because they ruined the experience for me, but because there are problems that have shown up in what started off as one of my favorite tracks of all time. The nerfs done to the parking lot section are a downgrade, and same with the escalators. And I'm calling it out as such because this shouldn't be happening to Coconut Mall of all tracks. Does anything I pointed out detract from the fact that whenever it's time to race on them, either because I'm playing through the Golden Dash Cup, the track got picked by the random tracks option in versus mode, or it gets picked online, my first immediate thought is, oh great, it's shopping center, compared to, oh no, it's shitting center. I should write for AVGN. The fact that such an amazing track is available in a great game is so cool, even if instead of being awesome because of what they did to it, it's awesome in spite of what they did to it. No amount of dragging Nintendo over the coals can erase the golden base of what they were using, and it's still a course that provides some fun-as-hell races and atmosphere nonetheless. Again, loving something in a Nintendo game despite the obvious lack of care present in it seems to be a trend with this company.
But this ship can't sink.
After a double whammy of both, this track is great but is not great like the original, and oh my god, my free time is gonna be grounded to dust. It's nice to finally be talking about an amazing track that's actually on par with its original version. And it happens to be one of my favorite Double Dash tracks as well, how great. I mean, what could be more creative and fun than driving through a literal cruise ship owned by one of the best Mario characters. The Double Dash version still stands its ground mostly due to the slippy slidey controls, slotting really well into the track design, and is also the most thematically appropriate there, considering it's the Mario Kart game with the highest ratio of visible daisy ass. Look, you know what you were getting into when you saw this video was made by me? What this version has to make up for the less slippery controls are the visuals. At first I wasn't exactly sure why they made so much of the ship green, since I thought the color scheme of the original fit Daisy more. But over time, I've come to the realization that the visuals in this version just pop the fuck off now. You think that the BCP's lack of detail would negatively affect this track, but nope. It looks so pretty, the extra fidelity and the brighter textures, especially when it comes to the inside. The original still looks very nice, but here they brighten up the inside with bigger windows and a stronger chandelier, and people are actually at the moving tables now. Same applies to the hallway afterwards. It's such a great world building in a world I really wanted them to build. And even outside the ship, the increased fidelity compared to the GameCube make the outside sea look even more grand. I wouldn't say this track reaches base game territory in terms of visual effort, but it 100% reaches drop dead gorgeous territory. I'm so happy that they gave the first HD version of this track the justice it deserves. The track itself, aside from no longer being in Double Dash, is still just as good as ever. I mean, the pool being drivable in since 7 does make the long satisfying turn you could do in the original less satisfying and required. But it does make sense with the other pass being opened, making it so that it doesn't just launch you into the waiting area. I mean, they didn't need to have this other pass, but I like having the choice more than I like making a turn, so I'm fine with this other pass existing. Plus, we can now screw over these Goombas trying to relax. I don't know why I'd want to, they look pretty chill in there. I also like that they kept the seller that punishes you for not taking tight turns, especially with 7's changes of making it underwater and giving you more item boxes than one double. It's something that you have to pay attention to avoid, but if you end up in there anyway, you're not totally screwed. It's in the spirit of many of those really punishing traps in the carts of old. For a track that's otherwise pretty straightforward in terms of layout, something like this is really appreciated. Also, they added violence to the music. Holy shit, yes. I did not know this song needed it until now. Very glad they gave such a classic stage the treatment it deserved. Is it a full reimagining of every aspect? No, but it also doesn't take away from anything that made the original track so great. It's still a beautiful ride through a big ship driven by the best princess, which is something we truly needed in this game. Still a slapper so many years later, and is by far the best Double Dash track in 8 Deluxe. A big step up from the ones we were getting right at the very start. Alright, can we have Mushroom City back now? DK Summit is yet another re-favorite that I'm happy to see. Once again, I'm not sure if we needed this many in the game, but at least they were overeating on good source material. Do you think this track would be in a similar boat to DK Mountain, in that I don't like this version as much as the original? Which is true, but while DK Mountain was way less chaotic in Double Dash, which was the issue, DK Summit is... Yeah, you think the lower trick height and the more refined controls would make it more straightforward, but this was the retrack that was all about its half pipes, and since half pipes in this game are held together by duct tape, it leads to a lot of shit like this. Shit like this shouldn't be happening, but hey, it's funny. Not so funny when it cost me the match, but I think it kind of reflects what the intent of this stage is, to have zero expectations on what will happen. While it's way more of a normal track than DK Mountain, it still gives a vibe of just hop down the mountain and see where you end up. I mean, the main feeling is, of course, the awesomeness and extremeness of going down to ski resort at high speed. But you look at the map here and tell me that this is normal. The feeling of getting shot up and then heading down the mountain was not even you knowing what's going to happen. It's a type of adventure that I live for. What are all the curves doing? Where will these hills send you? What will the half pipe do? Will the Shy Guys run into you? All these questions and more are what you'll find out as you go along. And in a race which is already chaotic on its own, the anticipation of seeing what funny shit will happen to you that will still leave you in a good spot once it's over is what embodies DK Summit, which I personally love. In a race, am not really a fan of it in time trials. As someone who's beaten every 150cc staff ghost, this is not a track you want to perfect. One of my friends compared it to winning a Smash Major with items and Final Smashes on, and that's shockingly accurate. Well hey, at least doing those time trials made me learn how to perform the double gap jump, which you can still do in this version by the way. It's a bit more punishing this time around due to the physics, and also because if you fall into the second gap, you fall for a long time before Lakitu saves you, which is surprising, but in races it doesn't matter too much since you still have the chance to use items to surpass anyone that's gotten ahead of you. Also, harsh punishment is probably necessary for such a cut like this, otherwise turning right earlier than you're supposed to would just be the new way to drive, and a lot of noobs would be confused when this track gets picked online. I'm recording this bit ahead from the rest of the segment. I've realized that in my own races after the time trial, I've only been trying for the single gap jump, so I'm gonna be trying the double gap jump from now on, and if that doesn't work for me, I'll go back to the single jump. Track still looks pretty nice as well, though I obviously prefer the foggy sky in the Wii version. Creates a sense of atmosphere because you can't see what's down the hill ahead, making you need to focus more on where your driver is right now. This version still looks pretty good visually though. They finally replaced the Mario statue in a DK course with a DK statue, because Nintendo realized they needed to start making their DK themed tracks actually about DK. Mario can't put his face on 50 mid-circuits and then take up the branding on one of DK's biggest hits. That's all I'm saying. The mountains in the background do slightly make up for the lack of fog. I think of it as more of a different take on the visuals. And this mountain right here is missing some textures on the rock, unfortunately, but at least they're the right color. Again, Also, the original DK Summit had one of the best songs in Mario Kart Wii, so in this game, it has one of the best songs in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And they didn't even change that much about it, they just added some more punch into it. Don't fix what ain't broke, just add some more structure to it. While it's awesome in a pretty different way compared to Wii, where in that game the chaos was at least more functional, it's still awesome in its own exhilarating yet unpredictable way. This is the type of jank that I like in a Mario Kart track. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like it when my tracks work how they're supposed to, but DK Summit iconic status makes this incalculable physics and frankly unfinished half-pipes justified, and it still results in a track that's an absolute hoot to play. And for that, I have to thank the bird that distracted half the office while they were working on Wave 4.
Get out of my car now!
So when everyone was throwing shit at Wave 1 for sucking, they pointed to this stage's visuals as a big genre-defucking example, pointing to the fact that it's tour-ported and unfinished. But you know what? I'll actually defend Shroom Witch's visuals here. They're awesome. They actually look even more realistic than the base game, honestly. I mean, damn, just look at them. I'm messing with you, this track doesn't look great. Yeah, this stage probably suffers the most from lacking textures. The bare grass is one thing, especially since the drivable surfaces are usually the one part of these tracks that Nintendo actually puts effort into, but the cliffs are even more egregious. At the very least, they're the color that they're supposed to be in, but wow, they look lazy. I mean, I don't think this track looks straight up bad, and I'll get into why later, but if I ever get pulled over while I'm here, staring into the geometry would not give me much to work with. So with that topic being over and dealt with, holy shit, the stage kicks ass. The traffic in this track is the perfect balance. It's not completely filled to the brim with cars to the point where it's undrivable, but it still provides just enough that there's still an active hazard that you have to look out for. There's no instance where you can be blindsided by an oncoming car, or have two of them side by side next to each other in an impassable barrier. And yet, there's still plenty of instances where you can see a car and drive around a car. My only real complaint with the traffic is that they no longer drive in both directions like they did in DS, but while that is odd, it doesn't really affect my opinion too much. Just something that could have been nice. On top of that, the design of the road is top tier as well, with so many satisfying U-bends and twists and turns where every boost from a drift feels powerful, and it still complements the traffic amazingly. This big one in particular is so satisfying to go around, especially when you just stop before driving into the oncoming wall. And on top of that, the shortcuts. Oh my god, the shortcuts. The two that are in this track are some of the best that this game has to offer. One is an expansion of one that you could do on the DS, with an extra added glider ramp so you can take it with one mushroom and not two. Not only is that a good realization of potential, but flying into the tunnel is very satisfying to do. But the second shortcut is just wow. A gust of air that you can trick off, not in a glider section. Instead, you need a mushroom and a truck to not drive in front of it, and then presto, you skip one of the final turns of the track. And keep in mind, this was something that's brand new to this version, which probably should have been obvious since the shortcut relies on you tricking to work, which wasn't a thing in DS. But I mean, one of the most well-designed, interesting DS tracks being added into a game with better controls, and with god-tier shortcuts added alongside it. Oh my lord, why aren't people praising this track more often? Oh yeah, I forgot. I stated this already in the intro, but while it's obvious that Nintendo did not even think about how this track looked before putting it into the game, I do still think it works. The so-called grass is still super green, it blends well with the color of the rocks, the sky is nice and bright, there's a billboard of a moo-moo that you can't see, but at least it's there. If I'm just looking at a picture of the track at school while I'm brainstorming on how to write this segment, then yeah, it doesn't really work. But in game, in combination with the gameplay and music, I'm much more into it. Wait, did I mention the music? Because I'm not sure if I need to. You know the drill, one of the best songs in the game. It's a perfect mix of DS and 8 Deluxe's music instrumentation, it stomps all over DS Mario Circuit's music in that regard, and it fits perfectly with the upbeat nature of the track. It's just so damn lively. Similar to Rosalina's Ice World, it's so amazing that it makes the original version of the song sound like a bad MIDI. Let me tell you, the fact that Tor just uses the original DS song rather than the banger 8 Deluxe remix is something that I will never understand. I mean, this track doesn't really work in Tor at all, to be honest, but at least this track got in there so that it could be eligible to show up in 8 Deluxe. I know there's people that view Shroom Ridge as a filler Wave 1 track, but I view it as anything but. This upgrade of a banger DS course is one of the best tracks that the BCP had to offer, and I'm so happy that we got it over, say, DK Pass. Thankfully, it seems that a lot of people are coming to the realization that this course is awesome too, so I don't have to pull out the U word. Not that I have a problem with using that, but I don't want to overuse it. I mean, at least that word has a better reputation than the O word, which social media has completely ruined.
Let's get out of here before the moon gets frisky!
If you didn't know anything about the tracks themselves, Moonview Highway seems like the most unnecessary choice in the entire pass. This pass is already overflowing with Wii tracks and city tracks, so you're throwing the Wii city track into the mix as well? And it's one of the tracks that didn't get leaked beforehand, so it didn't even get a warning? Give me a break. Then you remember that said Wii city track was one of the best Nitro tracks in that game, and you start being happy. By that, I mean I start being happy. I loved this track in Wii, it was just so fun avoiding all the traffic alongside the scenery of a hillside in the city at night. And I was worried for a very long time that it, alongside the rest of the Special Cup, would never see the light of another game again. But lo and behold, it's shown up not just in the mobile game, but in the console game as well. Boy, aren't I happy to be living in this timeline. Additionally, this is another one of those remakes that are on the same level as the original track, even with the amount of changes that were made to it. For one, they decided to remove a good amount of the cars. Wait, what? Yeah, this is the one change that still gives the Wii version some leverage as opposed to this version being just a straight upgrade. As someone who isn't very good at video games, the ball crunching difficulty of tiptoeing between all the long stretches of traffic in the original version was a blast to execute. It felt like a challenge you truly had to overcome, fitting for a Special Cup track. I did really like that, But to be fair, I do think it's fine that they made the traffic easier here. I think they could have had 20 cars on the road instead of 16, but as it is now, it still provides fun gameplay of steering around the cars to get to the finish line, especially since they still have the bomb cars, which were by far the most dangerous cars on the track. I'm fine with Moonview Highway being easier just as long as it still has difficulty, unlike say the removed flower beds in Peach Gardens, where the difficulty was removed in favor of absolute jack. And also the reduced amount of traffic does make the change done to the city section more usable. Probably explains why they did that. Basically, I like to view this as an alternative take on Moonview Highway, rather than trying to be the definitive version of it. And thank God I'm doing so, because pretty much everything else in this track is an upgrade, including the other gameplay changes. They threw in the surfboard cars from Toad's Turnpike, usual for a traffic course. They made this hill at the start not useless, and most notably of all, they made the boost panels in the city change positions each playthrough. This is such a cool thing that they added. It's not like the ramps in Excitebike Arena where, despite them being different every ways, you're still doing the same thing no matter what. The boost panels being different means that you have to manually turn or head towards every single panel to get a constant boost, and that, in combination with the traffic, means that every time you reach the city, you're handling it in a different fashion than you were before. This is really cool, and it makes up for having the traffic no longer speed up when you reach the city section, something that I honestly never noticed in Wii. And in terms of aesthetics, oh my god. This track definitely had care put into it in that department, which is more than I can say for Shroom Ridge. The moon is so much bluer and brighter and prettier, the way it illuminates the sea and even the road itself. The entire ridge section is just so much more moody compared to the original. It's not even close which one looks better. The city sections at least still hold up in the Wii version, but here it still looks great with the bright lights and illuminated buildings. They also changed the Mushroom Moon poster to be more cartoony, which I guess was a style that the BCP was aiming for, but with the rest of the track looking like this, it could have fooled me. And the music is some of the best in the entire BCP. The original song was already a banger, but this remix expands on it tenfold with louder synths, counter melodies that hit hard, and an overall atmosphere of a moody area that's still getting lit the fuck up. In this state, this track already had one of the best songs in this game just with this alone, and that's before you remember that they also remixed the city variation of the music. Which in case you forgot, it's smooth ass jazz that they made even smoother. Good Christ, they really put in all the sounds for this one. So not only did one of my favorite Wii tracks get into a Deluxe, but it actually managed to justify its inclusion with how it's given fresh new life, and how it implements new ideas. This could have easily slotted amongst the filler lineup, but it hasn't. Moonview Highway truly earned its spot in this DLC. This is exactly how 12-year-old me expected to see his favorite track return in a future Mario Kart game, though he probably expected it to look hyper-realistic as well, the naive little shit. I bet he also wished that once he turned 18, he'd be fully mature and exploring the world instead of doing the same thing he's doing at 12 years old, except with a lot more responsibility, stress, anxiety, and health issues. See, that's another reason why I love Moonview Highway. It distracts me from my strife. Maple. Another day, another Mario Kart fan sucking off Maple Treeway. Look, I ain't immune to propaganda, so if a Mario Kart game has Maple Treeway in it, it's obviously gonna end up being one of my favorite tracks. Well, as long as they don't massively screw it up. And they didn't! This track started life looking beautiful, and it still looks beautiful. The detailed ground, the landscapes, the luscious sunset sky, and of course the titular tree itself. Still got the orange and yellow leaves like usual, both above and below you, and even little paths that you can drive into to get an item. And those branches are looking extra nice with the detail they have. I remember thinking they were off-putting at first with how realistic they are, but I've grown to like how they look eventually, especially considering what the alternative would have been. The entire place is just so cozy and warm, and as someone who previously stated that they love fall aesthetics, something like this being executed so well would obviously appeal to me. Of course, it being in the BCP means it obviously isn't as pretty as it was in Wii, mostly due to the OG having more creative textures and the grass in this version being way more green than in the original. On its own it looks fine, but I've seen mods that turn the grass orange and it's a night and day difference. Even then, Maple Treeway in any state, let alone HD, still absolutely shits over most of the DLC in terms of graphics, which is what happens when you have a golden aesthetic to start with. The superb track design of the original is still pretty much intact as well. Every satisfying turn, every set piece, every piece of layered pass making, down to the very first section of the track. Like in Coconut Mall, this track has a perfect layout to match its perfect theme, and it still works just as well in a Deluxe as it did in Wii. They even still have the treehouse entrance where you have to drive around the moving wigglers as they waddle over in front of you, though for some reason they're more prone to walking in pretty much any other direction, which does lessen the threat of them a bit. But if they do so, at least they're still cute. Also, they swapped out the rope bridge at the end with a glider ramp. I did like that rope bridge, but it was definitely a Wii thing, and it wouldn't have worked as well with H's reduced trick height. A glider gives pretty much the same thematic flair and fits more with the engine. Well, 7's engine, but I'll take what I can get. Also in terms of music, literally all they had to do was make a remix. That's it. Maple Treeway's song was great enough to deserve an official remix. They gave one to us. It sounds great and doesn't miss the point of the original top 10 song in the game. It sounds like the song is being made by the tree itself. Yeah, I don't really have anything to justify when it comes to my love for this track, since my thoughts are pretty much identical to many other Mario Kart fans. And that's just talking about the specific version. If I have to count the whole 16 years this track has existed, then I have pretty much no original thoughts to cover. And if the only way I can stand out is by putting this track at like 35, I'd rather be indistinguishable. Honestly, I can't imagine a world where Maple Treeway wasn't in this game. Like, forget my earlier theory about the BCP only existing so Miyamoto could pay rent. The BCP only got made to get Maple Treeway in the best-selling game in the Mario Kart series, and we got 47 other tracks as a bonus, including 6 better ones, but let me theorize for a bit. Like, how can you be the game that's a new face for the entire franchise and not have Maple Treeway? That's like if the next 3D Mario game didn't have Mario, or Code. Okay, so 3DS Rainbow Road was obviously going to be S tier, and it's obviously going to be very high in S tier. Like, I can't imagine a universe where that wasn't the case. Not my favorite Rainbow Road, but that's entirely because of stiff competition with only one other. Also, despite being a Rainbow Road is not very difficult, but who cares about that? Driving this course is nothing short of magical. It's literally an interstellar journey that takes you throughout most of the solar system. And it's a 3-lapper as well, meaning it has the ability to cover more ground than usual on this idea. And oh boy, does it. Drive around Neptune, around Jupiter, drive on the rings of Saturn, which is the best planet in the solar system aside from Earth, don't at me. Fall onto the moon as the music dies down to one of the most beautiful and serene pieces in the entire franchise. Enter this long colorful tube that spits you out into a glider section. I remember learning about that in school. And just take in the complete and utter allure of the vast expanse of space. Driving here is just so fluid with how every masterful set piece is linked together, though to be honest, I think even a bad layout would have been redeemed by the visuals here. The sheer beauty of our own solar system being a Mario Kart track, with a Rainbow Road alongside it. It's just such a perfect combination and provides such galactic emotions that, hot take, even surpass Super Mario Galaxy itself in terms of spectacle. One of the most awe-inspiring tracks in the series. But this version's kind of a downgrade to the original.
I'm tired of you yapping! All you ever do is complain. You never try to make things better.
Okay, I'll try not to sound too harsh about my issues here because we're really getting into my favorite tracks, but yeah, I do think this version has a couple things missing from the original in Mario Kart 7, one of which has to do with the rainbow itself. I know you've probably heard the meme about it, and if not, I'll let you know firsthand that many people here think the road is too blue, which I kinda agree with, but not to that extent. The road here still looks amazing. It looks like it's literally constructed of Aurora, and the fact it's not tiled like every other rainbow in this game makes it stand out among them, which is fitting for what is probably the most unique Rainbow Road. It's definitely more visually stunning than the tour version. The thing is, look at 7's and now look at 8's. 7's had so many hues, all the colors blending together, it was one of the best and rainbowy looking textures of any Rainbow Road in the series. With a Deluxe, it's clearly more blue. I think that mostly has to do with the road's outline being blue, or maybe it's just the fact that the blue was the central pivot they decided on. Biva that has reached Master Edit status here, turns out that's literally what they did. The rainbow on this Rainbow Road is mapped to the camera and not to the road itself, and since blue is in the middle, that's why it looks kinda blue. Which honestly, now that I know that, that's kinda cool, even if it is a bit weird. Okay, moving back. It's not too blue, but it's definitely more blue than what came before it, which is weird, but it still looks great, so it's fine. Though we're on the topic of questionable aesthetic choices, why is the moon so dark? The sun is literally beaming right upon it, yet the surface itself looks like we're on the opposite side of the satellite. I think this is more egregious in the Blue Road because this straight up feels like a mistake. It's a bit of a shame because the moon on its own is a visual upgrade, with the more high quality textures and the increase of toads present. It's just being held back by the light source being put in the wrong place. Though, graphically this track is stunning, and it actually does improve the look in other areas. Most notably the fact these planets that are real planets in our solar system originally used to be identical rocky planets. I don't think that I need to explain why these getting replaced is a net positive. Also, they added boost rings to the panels on Saturn, which looks really good. And again, it's a literal intergalactic adventure. So it's gonna take a lot more than a differently colored road and a misplaced light map to make it look not incredible. Which leads into the other reason why I think this version isn't as good as the 7 version, which has to do with the track layout itself. they kinda flattened it. If you look at these comparison screenshots, you can see that the ones in 7 were significantly more curvy as opposed to 8. But apparently, Tor thought this was too scary, so they just turned them into regular turns. Beautiful looking turns, but nerfed nonetheless. I have no clue why they didn't revert them, or at the very least convert them into broken half-pipes. This is supposed to be the game with anti-gravity, right? Well then why can't we go on a curve? We're already ascending into another dimension by being on this track, why restrict something like this? 8's Rainbow Road could do it, why not you? You see these ending turns? How amazing they look? The height between you and the finish line waiting once you get down there? Well, in 7, this section was even better because the elevation of the turn let you take this large ass shortcut. I haven't actually taken this ever myself in 7, but god it looks so cool. It would have made the end of the race feel a lot more climactic as everyone is heading for this one cut. But for some reason, you can't do that in this version, which is stupid. Similar cuts exist in Big Blue's second lap, and even in other courses in this very same pass. So why can't one of the best Mario Kart tracks of all time do the same thing? Oh wait, I get it. This isn't a Wii track, so therefore it gets no big shortcuts. Cool, glad you're consistent. Anyway, yeah, I think this port is a little inferior to the 7 version. But to be fair, when was the last time I booted up Mario Kart 7? This version is still an absolute treat to the eyes and hands, and I'm still super excited to race on it whenever it shows up. Even if there's one more Rainbow Road that I personally like more. Just a truly transcendent experience. And also, the only Mario Kart 7 course in the booster pass where its inclusion was actually justified. I mean, I'm glad they picked the best available option at all. The gap between this and the other 3 are huge. You know what else is huge? We now officially have an HD version of 3DS Rainbow Road, and there's a new Nintendo console on the horizon, which means that the same 10 IPs are getting new installments again. So, Smash Ultimate 2, guess what? You now have a model of a Rainbow Road you can quickly turn into a stage. So do it!
You thought Koopa worked alone?
Imagine for a sec, you're one of those people who avoid Tor like it's the bubonic plague. Which admittedly might be an accurate description. You've grown up with the last few games and of such have been slapped in the face numerous times by the concerning amount of flat, boring SNES remakes that stick out like a sore thumb amongst the much higher quality track selection. Sure, Rainbow Road is great, but it didn't justify every other early 90s stinker that we've gotten. And oh god help me, we still have 11 tracks and 2 whole themes left to go through. And a SNES track has been leaked as the second last track in the entire game. Oh boy, we're all fucked. And then you see the track itself. And you're not as surprised as you could have been because your fellow Mario Kart fans have been posting in your Discord servers about Tor's Bowser Castle 3 remake, so you're already aware this was coming. But you are genuinely stunned by how realistic the brick textures look, and you've come to the conclusion this is base game quality before the track even begins. Okay, what I'm saying is, SNES Bowser Castle 3 absolutely fucks. Unlike a certain circuit, the theme here has been expanded tenfold. Expanded so much, we've either broken out of the castle, or Bowser just manually tore it down because he's sick of our shit. But don't worry, his neighboring castles are nearby. Both of them, meaning that wherever you turn, you'll be looking at a castle. Or a volcano. The neighborhood has really gone to shit. Also, I have to give them props for actually texturing every part of this track. Like, not even just the floor, but the brick textures of the walls and even in the background as well. It's practically a base game track with the effort put in, with the only thing giving it away are the cartoony clouds in the far, far background not having much in it. Aside from that, this is aesthetically perfect. It's a great retake on the theme that's finally on par with how Base 8 handled Rainbow Road. Well, Donut Plains too, but considering that an AI generated image has more personality than that theme, I'm not grouping it in. In terms of layout, I mean again, they actually added elevation and unique set pieces to a SNES track after 4.5 games of retros. So they're already winning in that front. But here's the thing, Bowser Castle 3 was already one of the few tracks in Super Mario Kart that were actually even slightly decent. Having a bunch of different paths available with islands and individual lines separated with pillars, not too shabby turns, and swamps expertly placed to provide a good amount of difficulty. The only thing holding it back was the bum-ass controls that the game itself had. So you take this surprisingly advanced track and you decide to finally give it a makeover. And let me tell ya, it was worth it. All the intricacies of the original layout are still present, but expanded upon. Now, the islands have been turned into paths split up by ramps, with the one on the left being the fastest, but having a jet of lava bursting out in the midst of it, so you don't always have the opportunity to take it, which gives purpose to the rest of the paths. Then there's a steep turn with anti-gravity, which then leads into the next big track element. Seems just like a regular split path section akin to the original. There's not even any risk reward to any of the paths. That is, on the paths you think you can take. Oh look, these walls let you drive on them. Yep, that's the point of this section. You want to get on top of the walls since they make you go faster, but that's something you can't just do on a whim when you get here. You have to plan your turn beforehand so you can properly line up on the walls, which is already pretty interesting, but then they throw in some swamps that are right to the way you need to drift, so you need to accommodate for that as well. If you screw up, you can still take the big pass, but when you do manage to get on top, it feels gratifying. But if that's not enough creative swamp use, the final section of the track showcases a revolutionary way they can be used. See, instead of the thumps being a threat when they're slammed down, they're instead a threat when raised up. Not only do you now want to avoid the state that originally meant good things, you actively want them to go down so you can trick on their heads. It took 8.5 entire games for a Mario Kart course to finally do this, when it should have been obvious from the moment they were added. Well, and they actually had collision added to the top of their heads. Also, the layout is a usual C shape, a shape so good that half of Super Mario Kart's roster stole it for their own tracks, to varying degrees of success. That's longhand for the turns are satisfying. Yeah, I think you can see why I was so blown away by this track when I first played it. As mentioned in the last ranking, I was a part of the crowd that was desperately hoping for a second Bowser's Castle in the game for 9 years. And when we finally got one from a completely unexpected source, not only did I find it worthy enough to stand alongside 8's very own Bowser's Castle, I actually thought it was even greater, and I've gone back and forth on this over the following years as the shock value has slowly waned. But while I have decided that 8's superior graphics and stakes give that one the edge, which is unfortunate for this track since it means it misses out on a global top 10, the amount of effort and interest in this Super Nintendo track still gives it a damn great stand in my eyes, even after the hype of a SNES track being interesting has worn off. This is the perfect as an introduction to this new era that we could have gotten, and it makes me excited to see what other SNES tracks will join this and Rainbow Road to be part of the not mid club. I mean, there's so much potential with a full remake of things like Koopa Beach 1, and Vanilla Lake 2, and Mario Circuit 4.
Open the door, we have your baby.
Well, we found it. The most flawless track in the entire BCP. I mean, there's 3 tracks that have higher highs, but in terms of consistency in every area, Yoshi's Island is your best bet. I legitimately can't think of anything this track does wrong, and that's not even getting into the stuff it does right. This is how you do a crossover track. Despite its short lengths, it packs so much visual variety and references from the game of the same name. Orange grasslands, underwater, castle, snowy mountain, cloud top, all in the span of 1 minute. It doesn't feel bloated or that it's lacking transitions, everything flows really well. And that's on top of all the Yoshi's Island iconography present as well, like the Shy Guys on stilts, which in a vacuum is already such an adorable sight, chain chomps and piranha plants, these ducks wearing pants, Nep Anut, which is what this big water blob is called, and you even have Poochie himself on the starting line. But not as a playable character, sorry Tor fans. The obligatory remix of Obstacle Course is great too, and it feels even more like it came from the original game than say the Smash remixes, which is saying something. And there's unique starting and ending music based on the tracks from the game, and there's unique item box roulette sound effects.
Yoshi coins!
You can tell that this track was designed, built, and play tested by dedicated fans of Yoshi's Island, and I can't help but respect the team for making such a love letter to the source material. Heck, I'd argue it's an even better tribute than half of the Yoshi franchise itself, which instead wears the source material around its neck for bragging rights, while instead makes it smell awful. The layout itself is actually pretty simple for what is otherwise such a busy site, which for the record isn't really a problem. In fact, it's one of those simple tracks with many satisfying turns and cut opportunities, which are stated to be a pretty good basis for a track. My favorite of the cuts is this one where you literally cut on an ascending piece of off-road. That shit's so godly to pull off. And there's also this cool cut at the end that you can take to get a faster finish. Well, it would be cool if it wasn't for the fact that if you are taking it, you've lost. Didn't you see this cloud just seconds ago that when you hit it, you spawn in a bridge that's faster than making the turn, and you don't even need a mushroom to do so? And it specifically dumps you through a goal ring afterwards. How charming. This cloud was the best way they could have implemented Yoshi's Island gameplay into the track, just narrowly beating out the game criticizing you for not getting every coin or running into every item box. You know, the true Yoshi's Island experience. And just like the Hyrule Circuit sword cut, it creates a lot of potential in races where even if you missed a cloud, the racers behind you can still spawn the bridge in anyway, meaning that there's still hope for the faster option. It may even be more exciting here since the time difference is more drastic than in Hyrule. If there aren't any other racers nearby though, I guess it does show the closest thing to a flaw that this track has, which is that sometimes the cloud can be in a spot where it's impossible to hit, no matter what you do. In time trials and certain unlucky frontrunners, that's an issue. But when it's not an issue, there's pretty much no other downsides. There is not a single other thing that this track does wrong. It not only achieves its goal of being a perfect crossover with its visuals and gameplay, plus all the unique touches it was given in the process, but it does so without neglecting any elements or disappointing any crowd. It's a track for the casual fans because of the superb visuals and plentiful references. It's a track for the competitive fans because of the turny layout and chances for catching up, and it even combines both communities at the end with the wing cloud. It is the most perfect track in the entire DLC. Not the best, but the most perfect. The only reason I can think of why people wouldn't like this track is because the theme of a Yoshi's Island crossover doesn't interest or appeal to them, which means they can't really get into it or care about it as much as other people do. As for me though, while I wouldn't say I love the game Yoshi's Island, I do certainly like it, and that's enough for me to say that I've fallen in love with this track, like a majority of the Mario Kart fanbase. Actually wait, I lied. There's actually a big problem with this track. What the fuck is this thumbnail? I know you're trying to recreate the game's title screen, but with that title screen, you can actually see the island. Now this is the best Rainbow Road in the game, mostly because it's a port of the best Rainbow Road in the series. I don't think there's any other track that could have ended the DLC in the entire game than this. I mean, 3DS would have also been an appropriate ender, but considering that Wii Rainbow Road masters both spectacle and difficulty, while 3DS only masters the former, I think this was the most fitting of the Rainbow Roads to close with. Also again, 3DS got downgraded a bit, so they probably didn't want to end on that debate. I mean, this is also technically inferior to its original version, but here is less due to this version's failings and more to the original version's strengths. By that, I mean the original game's strengths. The less refined bike controls made that version much more difficult, which isn't helped by the added guardrails. Come on, don't give us the game for free. Aside from that, this is basically as faithful of a remake as you can get. Not only was the magical feel of the original kept, but now it's in even more high definition. It doesn't look better than the original, but it still looks incredible. The beautifully colored road that's tiled, yet every tile is still a rainbow in of itself. And yeah, it's a little bit focused on green and pink, but it's nowhere close to the same extent that 3DS's road was to blue. The bright side of space, the star bits everywhere, the tunnels, the planets in the background, including the sight of being in Earth's atmosphere. It's probably the best looking rainbow road in the entire game. And as for the gameplay, that's also translated well. Again, it's not as hard as the original due to the better controls, but even then, this still feels exactly like the Rainbow Road I fell in love with back in Wii. You know, after I finally beat 150cc Special Cup with automatic drifting because I was an idiot. It's just adjusted to work more with 8 Deluxe's controls, with the slanted turns, the wavy road you can get tricks on, getting every boost panel at the start, and at the end with the split pass and final turn. It all still works fantastically. I'd also like to mention that they threw in low gravity on the double hole section, making it feel better to jump over the gaps. Hell, you can even more easily skip this one turn thanks to it, which I love doing. That and taking the half pipe cut just at the right angle when you're basically just instantly hopping from one area to another. Sometimes I land even faster than I expect to, which is even better. On top of all these details, they even kept you turning into a meteor when you fall off the track, in a game where Elect 2 usually just saves you without a sweat. That's what I like to call Wii privilege. Oh, also, you know how I put a few forced legal disclaimers on how this version doesn't play or look as good as the original despite being really damn close? Well, sonically, that's a whole different story. This remix is a giant upgrade to the original song, which itself was the best song in the series that wasn't from 8 Deluxe. What was once a fast-paced, joyous tune of celebration and wonder is now tripled with the even more powerful instrumentation and more stacked production. Listening to this remix for the first time filled me with feelings. The feeling of realizing that this would be the last track we'd ever get in this game, and that said track was going to be a truly great one. I know it sounds weird to be getting so emotional over a DLC created for money and nothing else, but they managed it. Easily the second best song in the entire franchise, only being beaten out by, well, I'll get into it later. I knew from the moment this track got leaked that it would be the most appropriate, fitting, and exhilarating finale that this pass could have gotten, and after finally being able to play it after like a year of build-up, I can confidently say that it was worth it. An outstanding remake of one of the best tracks in the series, and quite possibly the most important position in the entire DLC. And of course, it's one of the best tracks in the entire game. But it only just barely misses out on the fabled S Plus expansion pack, which yes, 2 tracks did manage to get in here, which is shocking for BCP standards. And if you're wondering why Wii Rainbow Road isn't also in S Plus, I'd feel like shit if I found the answer, so I won't.
I want to be ninja.
So Ninja Hideaway was always going to be number 2. Of course, it was my number 1 for 4 waves, and then it literally got dethroned by 1 track, and hasn't gone any lower in the months since. That part was easy, but what was more tricky was deciding if this track should be in the fabled S Plus tier or not, because there are a lot of things that could hold this course back. It's a Wave 1 track, so even though it has god tier visual styling as I'll get into later, it has very little texturing or detail done to it, The track model feels oddly small, which makes making some of the turns more difficult than they need to. There's a lot of straightaways. There's a soft lock on this track, which admittedly you have to actively be trying to get, but still, there aren't even any ninjas anywhere. Sure, the ninja Shy Guys are cool, but there's already so many tracks with Shy Guys in them. Give some other Mario enemies a chance. These factors and more have actually given this track a bit of a controversial status over time, with some people even considering this track to be absolute dog water. And I can kinda understand what they mean, even if I think a bunch of them are overreacting. With all these issues in mind, can this track really be a whole tier above so many other tracks with less fundamental problems? Yes, they can be, as long as you don't care. Ninja Hideaway feels like it was specifically created to appeal to me. I think ninjas are cool. I'm not unhealthily obsessed with them, but I do like their mysterious nature and iconography, so a Mario Kart track based on the ninja's hideout is something I can get behind. But then they go the extra mile of making the track's aesthetic revolve around purple. Purple sky, purple roof, everywhere else is floating around a similar palette. Like, that is pandering to an extreme degree. As such, not only is the track filled with ninja imagery everywhere, but it's all built around the best color palette. And to add even more onto the pile, the front of the house has a Wario mustache. Can this be a reference to the characters from the acclaimed video game series WarioWare, Kat and Anna? If so, now I feel even more pandered to. And the race hasn't even begun yet, but once it does, oh boy. I'm sure you're aware of how this track works. Split pass absolutely everywhere. There's been many instances of that already in the series and even in this very game, but this track, most notably this introductory segment, takes the concept to a new extreme. Do you want to go on the bottom to have a more smooth, uninterrupted path? Or do you want to go on top where there's more coins and more boosts, but you have the risk of falling off if you're not careful, or the platform isn't synced to your movements? And the one I like the most about these paths is that despite them offering different opportunities and different scenery, none of them are better than each other or make any of them irrelevant, which extends even outside this scenario. This means that you're free to take whatever path you feel like, and you won't be put in a disadvantage for doing so. If I like tracks despite them having this issue, I'm sure as hell gonna applaud tracks that don't. And the sheer verticality, with gliders allowing you to reach higher paths, even across different laps. This final section displays similar risk-reward path thing, even if it's not as prevalent as in the beginning. And the top pass even has a cool shortcut on 200cc, which is a good way to make up for the amount of toadette-shaped holes I created at that speed. As you can imagine, my first playthrough of this track was pretty much just me constantly getting my socks blown off at every turn, and at every newly discovered route. The stage just continuously got better and better as I went through it, and I was just lapping it up. Even after I've memorized every pass due to my insisted repeated playthroughs of this track, the variety on offer is just so overwhelming. I haven't even mentioned the stuff of like the shortcut available on the bottom route you need a mushroom or shell for, because this track is just filled with content as it is. By far one of the most well thought out and dynamic courses in the series. And to think, a track with this level of creativity has been paired with such a goated theme with goated architecture and goated color palette. And of course, goated music. Literally, the music in this track is the greatest piece of Mario Kart music of all time. The instrumentation is perfect. The constant pace creates such a damn funky mood. It's so unique amongst the rest of the OST, and there's even chanting in the intro that you can sing along to if you really wanted to. I legitimately can't listen to this track without at least banging my head to the beat to a concerning degree. And that's just when I'm sitting down. In fact, I got so attached to this song, when it got remixed for the BCP's credits, I legitimately felt chills go down my spine. It's that amazing. It also, and yes, I've actually seen people say this, doesn't sound anything like Friday Night Funkin' music. So if you're that biased against this track that you feel the need to make a comparison like that, yeah, I don't really know what else to say about this course. I made it very clear after Wave 1 dropped that this was a new favorite of mine, and I've stuck to my guns about that ever since. Tracks like these need to become a staple in every future Mario Kart game. Offer so many different pathways, but still give them all a reason to exist. Have them integrated into the layout in creative ways, make them all fun to go down, and of course, pair it with an absolutely great theme that I have to be a fan of. Sorry, Desert Track fans. And give it god tier music as well. But if that's too hard for your small brain development team you've hired for Mario Kart 10, just put in Ninja Hideaway as a priority retro instead, and give it a makeover while doing so. Again, I love the visuals here, but they're definitely Wave 1 visuals, and a track this goated should not be suffering from Wave 1-itis. And yet somehow, there's still one track that managed to beat it out, which you've probably already guessed, because there's only one option left. You know, I should have saved this big dramatic build-up before Ninja Hideaway so there would actually be some suspense. Oh well, hindsight's 2024. Anyway, let's get into the 4th best course in the entire game and have a lengthy discussion on whether or not Nintendo should actually receive credit for it. Spoiler alert, we're not doing that last bit.
Shadow points at the bathtub. You fucking smelly.
So, if that big fat number 1 didn't already showcase what I think about this track, here's another little factoid that will surely get you to understand. This is the only BCP track that I have ranked above any of the S+ tiers from the base game. Yes, a track from a DLC consisting of tour ports managed to beat out one of the original GOATs. I rest my case. The S+ tier in question that got beaten was Ribbon Road, which again, it takes a lot to be better than this track. I mean, how can you beat a track with my favorite type of Mario Kart course theming? Seems like a near impossible task at first, but it turns out the answer was surprisingly straightforward. To follow up a track where the racetrack is in a room, they decided to make it so that the racetrack is the room.
You are tearing me apart, Lisa!
Okay, real funny, smartass. Me. I'm the smartass. If Ninja Hideaway was pandering, Squeaky Clean Sprint is just straight up carrot on a stick. The reason why I like tracks set in ginormous rooms is that whatever the layout ends up being, it will be visually represented by some damn fitting set pieces. Every element of the track is an entirely different object crafted entirely by hand. I already pointed it out on my first ranking video on how well Ribbon Road handled the same thing, even when just focusing on the playset, delivered alongside pauses that are 10 years long. So whatever the type of room or overgrown real life area it ends up being, they're gonna do some cool shit. And in this case, that happens to be the bathroom. The fact that it probably wasn't even top 5 in terms of cool big area concepts, and yet I was still hyped beyond belief upon seeing it, shows exactly the type of person I am. Yep, they used every element you could find in a bathroom in the design. To describe it all, you start by driving into a sink in the first few seconds, then you drive into a bath where there's bath bombs that give you air boosts and a pass on top with sponges that function as a way to get in without having to fall for a long time. If I were to just tell you that this was a water section with air gusts and a top pass, you probably wouldn't understand where the hype was coming from. But it's the way they use objects found in the bathroom to recreate it in a way that would still logistically make sense if this really was a bathroom that really satisfies my needs. But how are we meant to access the rest of the track if we're stuck in the bath? Well, you just enter the drain and go through sewage until you sprout back out through the drain on the floor, giving you access to everything again. And in the train, there's a ring that somebody lost down here, now posing as a shortcut. Excellent use of opportunity. Meanwhile, afterwards, the off-road is soap, and there's an activated stand that makes this turn extra hectic and interactive. And of course, it ends you by shooting you over the toilet. Well, at least we're not touching the toilet water. Oh god. I can see why this isn't a section track. We need to hop back into the bass after that scenario. And it's not even just the elements that actually influence the track's layout and gameplay, but just what makes up the barriers of the track provides such a visual delight as well. The barriers to the ramps in most tracks would just be walls, rocks, or trees, but here it's tennis balls. I have absolutely no clue why tennis balls are in the bathroom. Maybe they flew through the open window by accident and the house owner just decided to keep them. But like, when your track is constructed so that every barrier is not only interesting to look at, but individually interesting to look at, that's when you know you've done a good job designing a track. There's no place on this course that I can look at and not be impressed. Not a single area. Even with the missed potential of base 8 level fidelity, this is one of the most grand looking tracks in the entire game. So while playing this for the first time, I was obviously very elated. But I was still thinking, so is this better than Ninja Hideaway or what? Because remember, that track was still my BCP number 1 when this track came out. I mean, yeah, this has cooler visuals, but Ninja Hideaway had all these alternate paths mapped to perfection, which this track doesn't seem to have. Wait, that wasn't the level of show I was on in the first lap? What's going on? You're giving us access to a glider ramp for the next few laps, that's cool. Wait, there's a whole array of alternate paths to the right? Some of which show brand new set pieces like a ticket ramp, a plant leaf you can bounce on like a mushroom, and a mushroom plant that you can also bounce on because it's a mushroom. It was at this point that I realized that this track was literally made to snipe ninjas position out. So I guess it succeeded.
Stream sniping.
I feel like I made this track. Well, I possessed somebody with actual talent first, and then I made this track. It's literally a combination of most of my favorites. A concept similar to Ribbon Road with paths like Ninja Hideaway, and general layout like most of my favorite tracks. Is it like Coconut Mall? That also has vertical layers. I'm really making stretches here. Never mind, go back to the Ribbon Road comparison, because that's basically what this is. This is the most logical continuation of that great theme, and it not only makes me happy about how they managed to pull it off to this extent, but it also makes me excited to see what can be done with this theme in the future. Obviously a third room track in a row would probably be repetitive. They probably need to expand to like a backyard, or a public area like a restaurant or an office. If this is how creative they can be with a bathroom, the potential for those two ideas would be near limitless. For the record, the gameplay itself is still fun for the reasons I stated earlier. The only issues that I see with it is that if you miss the sponges at the start, you do have to endure the long fall to the bottom. I guess they could have put a more preferable alternative here, but if that does happen to you, it's your fault for missing the sponge chain. Also, there's the fact that the very cool alternate paths available at the start of lap 3 are a little bit slower than just going into the sink. Thankfully, I'm nowhere near competitive enough to care about that. I'm not saying I'm casual to the point that I think that anyone playing the game without frantic items is a loser, I just don't care. Again, I defend the useless alternate routes in Yoshi Valley, and the alternate paths here are obviously way cooler. So thankfully, the gameplay doesn't sink the great theme, which means that yes, I'm allowed to say that this track is awesome. If tracks like these are what we come to expect from the next game, if there ever is a next game, from not just tracks in the similar big room area, but just in general, I am excited. This track will be recognized as a classic in the series moving forward, and while I think there's 3 other courses in the entire game that are better than it, I'm perfectly happy with calling Squeaky Clean Sprint my favorite track in the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. Which means that it's at least the best track in Mario Kart Tour. Probably. I haven't had a chance to play SNES Ghost Valley 2 in it yet. Alright, there's my ranking of all 48 Booster Course Pass tracks. I did not expect that to take as long as it did, both how you saw me doing it and how I actually did it. Because close to the finish line, I was very burnt out and it was also exam week, so yeah. That being said, I will say that talking about these tracks was a bit more interesting than the base game selection, even if that category obviously has a higher level of quality. I mean, I was actually around to see all the discussion about this DLC, and the circumstances it's in, mostly around the questionable choices and the ethical side, gave me something to talk about. Also, everything is newer, so everything is fresher in my mind. But speaking of which, what about the base game compared to this pass? What if I combined both lists to make a full 96 track ranking? Which tracks in one category are higher than the other? Thankfully, my base game ranking, despite the later sections of the video being dropped with overtly long pauses, it's still pretty accurate to my stance right now. So, wait, why is Toad's Turnpike in C tier? Hang on. There we go. Alright, now that I've fixed that and some other stuff, now I can display my combined list. Boom. Yep, that's the full game right there. I feel like the only reaction I'm going to get out of this list is shock over the fact that tracks you like are below tracks you don't like, and that I also don't like. I'm hoping I don't get too much of that, but I feel like it's inevitable. I was always going to do a whole countdown thing with me naming each track in order from worst to best, but then I realized I could get the same result by just posting a compilation I made myself of every transition I used as a separate video, so I'll just point you to that. And speaking of pointing you to other videos, I'm proud of how I wrote my Mount Wario segment in the first ranking, but the lengths of the pauses I left in while editing it kinda ruin it, so I'd like to point out that I put a link on that video's description pointing to a version of that segment re-edited to have good pacing. It's what that masterpiece deserves after all. And I guess while I'm here I can plug some other stuff. I make mashup albums and mashups out of albums. That's it. That's all I feel like plugging. I had ideas for other rankings to do once I finish this one, but after the behemoth that I probably should have expected it to turn into, the only thing I want to rank is ranking each of the 4 months I spent heaving away at this. It's over, I'm done, goodbye.